Welcome to Sober Sunrise, a podcast bringing you AA speaker meetings with stories of experience, strength, and hope from around the world. We bring you several new speakers weekly, so be sure to subscribe. We hope to always remain an ad-free podcast, so if you'd like to help us remain self-supporting, please visit our website at sober-sunrise.com. Whether you join us in the morning or at night, there's nothing better than a sober sunrise. We hope that you enjoy today's speaker.
I think so. Does that work? Good evening, everybody. My name is Kenny, and I am an alcoholic. And welcome to the retreat here. I want to thank Tom and Juanita for being my host here and showing me around town, and for being our special, just being really special friends. And I want to thank Audrey for making the call and asking me to come do this retreat, and for everybody that's here. So before we get started, I think we'd like to maybe just start with a simple. I wrote a prayer up here on the board, which I will explain. You're welcome to read that if you can, and I will kind of go over what that prayer means here in just a little bit. But first, we'll just start with something simple. So we'll start with the Serenity Prayer, and we'll get our weekend started. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I am just really incredibly grateful to be here in New Mexico, to be here at this retreat center, and to be here with y'all. And I'm really looking forward to getting to know a lot of the people here in the group, and as we kind of build here this weekend, we'll see how the format works. Maybe we'll get things in a circle and get things a little more comfortable. I'll take care of just a couple of things, letting you know who I am. I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is June the 8th of 1989, and I've been continuously sober since that date. And my home group is Drunks Are Us North, which meets in Seattle, Washington on Friday nights at 8 o'clock. So if you are ever in Seattle, we really encourage you to come to our meeting. It's really it's quite a show on Friday nights there. And we actually, once in a while, we have to have an AA meeting and get a strong solution in the midst of all this craziness. So we'd hope that you'll come out to Seattle and visit us sometime and allow me to repay this favor. So I think I'm going to start tonight by just kind of telling you a little bit about my story, and we're just start with some real light stuff and some humorous stuff, and just kind of keep it simple. I'll tell you a little bit that it's amazing to me to get asked to come do these retreats. It's amazing to me to be asked to come speak places, because there was definitely a time in my life and in my sobriety where nobody asked me to speak anywhere. I mean, it just was, because my story was kind of like it just was kind of like what happened, and what happened. And it was just this long, drawn out thing. And then I would be like, and then I was in treatment, people would be thinking, oh, thank God this guy's going to get sober. And then I drank the day I got out. And it was real heartwarming actually for me. We'll look at that this weekend. We're really going to spend a lot of time in the book. And I just want to say before I even get started, that that I do have this what happened part of my story today. And that's what I've really come here to New Mexico to share with you, is I came to share with you that I've had an experience with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that has allowed me to live for 17 years as a free man, much like anybody else lives, and to enjoy this great life, and this somewhere in that process, this desire to destroy myself with alcohol and drugs was removed, and it was replaced by this useful and purposeful life, and I get to do a lot of really amazing things today, and I've got some really incredible stuff to share this weekend, and I hope that you'll my hope is that somebody's heart's going to be touched here this weekend by what I've come here to offer, that something I say will is going to benefit somebody, is going to have, that there'll be some spiritual awakenings here this weekend. And I said I wouldn't really talk too much about this prayer yet, and I won't, but, we're here to have a retreat. And you don't have to spend the weekend here to have a retreat. Just to come as much as you can this weekend, and it's the 12 steps is really a spiritual treatment, and one of the things that we, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we treat alcoholism with the 12 steps. That is the treatment, and so you can look at a retreat as if you've already had the treatment. And you may find, like I do, that the ego tends to kind of rebuild itself over a period of time. And suddenly I may be acting in a way in my life that seems kind of untreated, that I can come to a retreat and get retreated. And it's really something that came to me when I thought about this. I wrote this prayer that's up here, and I'll talk a little bit about that this weekend, about writing prayers. We're all going to have a chance to write prayers here this weekend and do some writing. And nothing I say here, don't let that scare you away. Nothing I say, there's nothing mandatory here this weekend at all in the least. And I really mean that, that this idea of prayer and meditation, we'll do some meditation this weekend, this kind of stuff, it can't be forced. It's just one of those things that has to come from within. So if there's anything that's said here or suggested here this weekend that doesn't sound right to you, then just don't do it, and nobody's going to be offended. And I want everybody to be comfortable. That's one of the things I said, like about the circle and stuff, is it's a more comfortable setting, and I want everybody to be comfortable. Tom and Juanita have come out and done the retreat that we do in Seattle, and it's very comfortable. I mean, people actually drag blankets and pillows, and people are in pajamas and stuff. I mean, it's a really comfortable retreat. Mike's been to a retreat that I did up in Durango a few years ago, and that was the same way. It was a small group, and we just, allowed us to get really intimate with each other. So I hope that everybody, as the weekend, will start to kind of form a retreat family here and a circle that even if we stay in this format, that people kind of start coming in a little bit and just be a part of this retreat. And it will be interactive too. We're going to have a time between each sessions for questions and answers. I got into these retreats in really early sobriety, and I really thank God for that now. And you'll hear a lot of that as I tell my sobriety story about, I just really feel fortunate today when I look back on it and I think about the guys that I got sober with, that I got sober at the time that I got sober. I was sharing with Audrey at dinner tonight about the World Convention in 1990 in Seattle, and I would have never went to that had it been anywhere else but Seattle. But I happened to be sober in Seattle just coming up on a year, and had a really dramatic impact on me, and I met some really incredible people there. And, so I'm just glad I got sober when I got sober, and I'm glad I got sober with the people that I got sober with, and I'm glad that I ran into these people. And they were really big on this work in the big book, and they were really big on the work, the step work, and these guys were really big on retreats. And I've come to find that I don't think, certainly, there's never been a time in my entire sobriety that's been more than a year, and I would guess it must be less than that, somewhat less than a year, that I haven't personally taken the time to do a retreat. And, these are incredibly important things in living the spiritual life. People that live spiritual lives retreat on a regular basis. So I'm really happy that we're here. So I'll tell you a little bit about my drinking history, and I will say this, that this is a retreat. It's not an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, but I will say this just to say it, because I like to say this, that I am an alcoholic member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what that means is that if I was to take all of the drugs and everything out of my story completely, as if they never happened, and I just looked at my drinking, it would be abundantly clear to me. As a matter of fact, I've done that. I've been through the big book from that standpoint, and it was abundantly clear to me that I am an alcoholic. So there is a lot of drugs in my story. There's a lot of talk about drugs, and I don't apologize for talking about drugs in AA. I'm beyond that, but I do let people know that, and the reason I don't apologize for that is because I would be incomplete to come here this weekend and try to dance around that. And I've tried that before, and it doesn't work very good for me. So that is whatever it is. So you will hear my story, and in case you're ever wondering, just I hope I get that point across that I drank a lot of booze, and I drank for a long time, and it was in there in the beginning, it was in the end, and it was in the middle. The booze was one of those things that was always there for me, and it was always my fallback on deal. So with that, I'll just tell you a little bit about my story, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to get into some really serious retreat stuff. But we are going to have a great time here this weekend. We're going to have a fun time, and we're going to have, we might have an emotional time, but we're going to do our best to have some laughter here this weekend. The laughter is one of the best medicines. We're going to try to be humorous and lighthearted, but we are going to also look at some really serious stuff, and we're going to, we're not going to hide here this weekend either. We're going to really be, it's going to be a very direct, from the big book weekend. It's the only thing that I really know. So, with that, I'll go all the way back to the first time that I ever got really drunk, and there's a reason that I go back that far, and it actually shortens my story a little bit, going back. And that is that the first time that I ever drank, I drank several times, but this was the first time that I drank with the sole purpose of just getting hammered. I was just going to go out and get really, really drunk. And I came from an alcoholic home. My mother was an alcoholic. She got sober when I was 13 years old. Shortly after I started drinking, my mother got sober. She's still sober today. She got sober in AA. My stepfather, who I grew up with, died of alcoholism, drank himself to death, and he was homeless when he died. And my house was the party house. They would go to the bar, and at 2:00 in the morning, when the bars closed in Washington State, the bar would come to my house, and that was just a normal deal for me. I mean, it was just this huge party, and there was myself and my brother, and actually a sister who was 8 years younger, who was just a toddler at the time that I started drinking, that were all in this totally insane situation. And the police came a lot, and there was arrests, and there was domestic violence, and it was just a really sad situation. And one of the things that was going on in the house at that time, leading up to this first time that I just made a decision that I needed to drink, was that I wasn't really taught like the hygiene and how to really take care of yourself, and it just wasn't, there just wasn't a lot of parenting in the house. There was food and there was a roof over our head, but there wasn't a lot of real parenting. So I would get up and I would get myself off to school every morning, and we just moved to another new neighborhood, which was just one after the other, because we were renting houses and get kicked out of houses, and we got to a new neighborhood, and I went to this brand new junior high school. And I think when I started junior high, I was 12. I turned 13 shortly after that, and I was still wet in the bed, and I would get up and I would just kind of like, and I have got over that problem. In case you guys you don't need to check your sheets, Tom. At the bed, I did fine last night. I did get over that shortly after I got sober, but I was still wet in the bed. And I would just kind of get up and I would just kind of towel dry myself off and throw some clothes and try to find some clothes in the basket somewhere and just put these dirty clothes back on. And I wouldn't brush my teeth, and I was going to school like I was scared to death in school like that. And then I had another thing, and I don't really like that word drug of choice, because really I think it's more of a drug of no choice was the way it ended up for me. But just because the term kind of fits in this situation, my first drug of choice was called lack of oxygen to the brain. And what that meant was that I would actually choke myself, and then just before I was going to completely pass out, and if you're nodding your head, it means you're a sick person. But I would choke myself, and just before I was going to pass out, I would let go just a second before, and I would get this euphoria for like 30 seconds or a minute, just be completely out of it. So I was a stinky kid with bad breath, and I smelled like urine. I was wearing old clothes, coming to a brand new school where I didn't know anybody, and then I would choke myself and stagger around and stuff. So in junior high, you know, my popularity kind of waned a little bit, and you know, I tell that because it is kind of humorous looking back on it, you know, and I just and people really thought this kid is a freak, and I used to hear that a lot, like, you are a freak, and no, don't come around me, don't let that kid touch you. And it was just a horrible deal, and the reason I tell you that, you don't need that kind of background to become an alcoholic. I do know that. My wife and I spoke at a deal just a little while ago, and there was 2 other speakers there, and they both came from these beautiful houses where the parents went to church and went to church every day, and they were wealthy and they were well cared for, and they became just as hopeless as I did. So I don't want you to take this wrong. But something I've really thought about is, coming from where I came from, there was something rather soothing about a drink. And it did something for me that I don't know that it would have done for a lot of other people. And my brother and I mowed this guy's yard, and he was a hippie that lived next door. And you know, we thought, well, he's pretty cool. You know, he's a hippie, and we knew he drank and smoked dope and stuff. And so we thought, well, maybe instead of paying us, he'll just buy us some wine. So we thought, well, okay. So we asked him if he'd mind buying some wine instead of paying us. And of course, being a good hippie, and this is the early 70s, and being a good hippie, he had no problem buying wine for 12-year-olds. And so he was like, sure, you know, I'd be glad to buy you guys some booze. What do you want? And I didn't. The only thing I knew was my parents drank Gallo wine out of the gallon jugs. And so I said, well, wine. And he said, well, what kind of wine? And there was that alcoholic thinking that never went away. And I just told him, and I had an older brother, and I was doing the talking. And I told him, I said, well, we're not really concerned with the volume. You know, we're not so concerned about the type. We're more concerned about the amount, the volume here. Just get us the most you can for that price, you know. So he said okay, and he came back and he had 5/5 of MD 2020. And I love to tell that story because that's the reaction I always get. You know, I could just end that story right there because everybody knows where that story's headed. But that night, you know, that guy who would never, and I couldn't talk to anybody, I couldn't do anything, we got that wine, and we told a couple other kids that were in our neighborhood that we had the wine, and we're going down to the schoolyard tonight. And a couple other kids joined us, and even these kids that knew nothing about drinking were telling me, I don't know for sure, but I don't think you're supposed to drink that much that fast. You know, I think that something bad is going to happen to you if you do that. And I just was drinking this wine, drank as much as I could, as fast as I could. And there was a girl that was coming home. She was like just cutting across the schoolyard at night. And she was a girl that I'd seen at the junior high school. And I thought to myself, you know, with this, once I had that wine in me, that kid that I was just completely transformed. And I thought, I'm just going to go down and take what's rightfully mine, you know. And I ran down this hill, and I tackled this poor girl to the ground, and I tried to force her to give me a kiss. And I was just telling her, oh, come on, give me a kiss. And she was screaming, and she got away, and the other guys are, what the hell are you doing? And it was just really a scene. And the thing about that, you know, I was already that freak kid at school. And then, you know, immediately I knew about that horror and remorsefulness of the next morning are unforgettable. That I knew I had to go back to the school being this freak who had now attacked this girl at the school the night before. You know, and then, you know, that makes for more drinking and that stuff. It just kind of started. And the reason I say that kind of shortens my story a little bit, because I can leave a lot of my drinking out and a lot of my drugging out, because my drinking and drugging never got any better than that. That was as good as it ever got for me. I would drink as much as I could. I would drink as fast as I could. And usually I would do something completely over the top. I would get in a fight. I would commit a crime. I would try to fight police officers. I would hit women. I would wreck cars. I was in the hospital, and I never finished junior high school. I was in the juvenile system immediately. I was within about 3 months of that first drink. I was taken out of my home. I was arrested for burglary within a year of that time. I was a homeless kid on the streets shortly after that, because they would put me in these group homes and foster homes, and I would run away and go back to the old neighborhood. And I was breaking and doing auto thefts and stealing cars and getting arrested. And that just kind of continued through when I was about 17 or 18. I kind of got my act together for a few years, and I got my grandpa worked, and he had some fishing boats that he worked for a family that owned some fishing boats. And they were going up to Alaska, and he got me a job, and it kind of saved me in a way because this was a job where you could, somehow I just had this really great work ethic, and I was able to work really hard. And I kind of somehow got my act together for a few years. And it was a job back then, and the Alaska fishing industry is a lot different now, but back then you could drink and drug on board the boat. I mean, it was all kind of a part of the thing. It was just everybody kind of thought this is the wild, wild west, and there's no police out here, and there's nobody watching what was going on. And a whole bunch of guys, hurt themselves and got killed in the Coast Guard. Now you have to everybody on the boat has to take a drug test before you can even throw the lines and leave the dock nowadays. And I still work in that business. I don't work going on the boats. I work in management in that business now. So it was something I came back to after I was sober. But, as a teenager, I got introduced to IV drugs, and I was doing IV drugs from a very early age. And that started a heroin addiction that was kind of an on-again, off-again thing all the way up to the time I got sober. And I went through this success in my business, and I actually worked my way up from a deckhand to an assistant engineer, and then I was chief engineer on the boat. And then the family that I worked for put me through treatment twice and finally let me go. And I couldn't even get sober enough to do that job. In the end, I couldn't get well enough to even take a job where you can drink and drug on the job. So I spent the last several years of my drinking and drugging in and out of hospitals, in and out of treatment centers. I'd accumulated some stuff during those years, and I sold all of it down to the very last little thing. Sold everything that I could get my hands on. I sold a lot of stuff that didn't belong to me, and there came a time I was just kind of existing, just living in these motel rooms. This is a story I was reminded of last night. We were sitting around at Tom Juanita's, and we were telling kind of some humorous stories, and people were talking about falling asleep with cigarettes, how dangerous that is. And I used to actually think life wasn't quite treating me well because I would go buy a whole pack of cigarettes, and I would sit down there in one of those hotel rooms, and I would light up a smoke, and I would think, I'm going to sit here and enjoy this whole cigarette. And I'd take one drag, and then out I'd go. And then I'd wake up and be burning my hand, and I'd just be thinking, God, is that too much to ask to just be able to sit here and smoke a cigarette, for Christ's sake? I go through a whole pack, and I don't even, I'm in nicotine withdrawals here, and I've just went through a whole pack. But I was in a hotel room. In Seattle, and it was called the City Center Motel, and it's gone now, but a lot of people still remember it. And it was one of those places that was full of prostitutes and drug addicts and people that were either coming to or going to the penitentiary. And there was I, and I fell asleep with a cigarette in that motel and started the mattress on fire. And I was laying there, and I was just in a pair of Levi's, no shirt, no socks, nothing, just in a pair of Levi's. And I was emaciated, and my eyes were sunk into the back of my head, and I had tracks all over my arms and hands and feet, and I was just in terrible shape and laying there passed out on this mattress that's smoldering. And for anybody that's, and I know there's several, but for anybody that's dealt with a mattress fire, they're really incredibly difficult things to put out. And I actually ended up, later on in life, I sponsored a fireman, and he said, oh yeah, when we get mattress fires or couch fires, they just take them completely out of the house, and they just slice them open, and they just, there's no way to get them out without just completely destroying them. So I woke up because the smoke was so thick, I was choking on the smoke in this hotel room, and I woke up, and I thought, oh boy, I got a situation on my hands here. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to take some water, and I'm going to pour the water on this deal and put this fire out. And so I got a pitcher, and I poured some water on this thing, and then I passed back out on this wet bed, and it started smoldering again, because that's not the way to put out a mattress fire. Started smoldering again, and the smoke got thick enough again to where I was choking on the smoke, and thank God I woke up. I mean, I would have killed myself and probably a whole bunch of other dope fiends too that would have never woke up in time had I burned that place down. But I woke up, And then I thought, okay, I got to get serious here. So I took one of the trash cans. They had a nice big trash can. And I took it in and started filling it in the shower and dumping that thing on the mattress. And then I passed out on the mattress again. And then I finally woke up and I was choking again. And the smoke had got down in the mattress somewhere and it was burning again. And there's all this water everywhere. And the thing about that is that a couple nights before that, I'd gone on a little paranoid trip, and I figured I needed to get the carpet up because there was something under the carpet that needed to be investigated. And I tore all of the carpet up from this place. I tore all the carpet up, and then in a moment of clarity, I tried to put all the carpet back and tried to put the molding strips back, to where they were. But with all this water, the carpet's kind of floating a little bit. And this room is destroyed, and I took a knife out of a pack I had, and I cut this mattress all up, and finally, tore the stuffing out of it, and got this thing out. And the smoke was so thick, I had to open the front door to this motel room, and it was one of those old-style motels where you actually pull your car up, and your bumper is practically touching the front window. And Highway 99 in Seattle goes right by where that city center. Now it's a Holiday Inn Express, and this is right down close to where the Space Needle is, which in those days was really not a very good neighborhood at all. And now it's been all cleaned up, and all the old haunts have been tore down. But at that time, the city center motel, so people were starting to drive rush hour to work and come, and the door was open, and I was passed out in that condition on this mattress, and there was stuff all over and water everywhere. And somebody, of course, alerted the manager that, hey, you might want to take a look in room number 108 down there. And we think you got something going on. And he got up and started yelling and screaming at me. And I was yelling and screaming back at him, in the way that we do, that indignant alcoholic, just telling him that if he had a smoke detector in that room, which I reminded him by law, he should have. And none of this would have ever happened, and how this was his fault, that I could have been killed. And thank God I got the fire out in time. And I'm arguing with this guy, and I'm still just standing in just a pair of soaking wet Levi's, and that was it in that condition. And there was a guy, and he's actually 10 years sober in the program. I hope I get a chance to tell you the story about the amends I made to him. In case I forget, I made an amends with this guy years later, and he ended up, when I got to the what can I do to make it right part, he wanted to know what the hell I was doing to stay clean and sober. And he's been sober over 10 years in the program now. He was another addict, an alcoholic, but he was a guy that still had a job and still had a little bit of stuff going. So he had a girlfriend he was staying with in a car. So his job had become stopping by the motel room every morning on his way to work to see if I was still alive or not. And that was really it. It was a knock at the door. It was, and this is from another heroin addict, knocking on my door saying, are you okay? Is everything all right? I'm worried about you. I'd like to see you, maybe get into detox or something. He was, worried that he was going to, and so that was his deal, was coming by every morning. And Yogi came by that morning and saw this scene outside the deal and pulled his car right up and just got all my stuff and just threw it in the car and said, get in the car, we're out of here. And we got into the car. And the amazing thing about that story is I continued to drink and drug in that condition for maybe somewhat more than another year. I remained in that kind of condition. And the thing about that is that I got into amends, and I remembered about that hotel room. And I can stand here and tell that story in good conscience because I went back and found the owner of that hotel who'd sold the building by that time. And I found the owner of the hotel, and I explained the situation, and I paid for the damage that I'd done to that hotel room. And so I can tell that story in good conscience today. But, the thing about that is that when I look back on it, I got into this amends process, and then I remembered, oh, yeah, I burned that guy's mattress up and stuff. But the thing about it is in that context of that day, there was nothing unusual in my life about that. I didn't call anybody up and tell them, God, you wouldn't believe what happened to me last night. Like it was nothing. It was nothing to me. It was just, I was just existing in this hopeless state of mind and body, just existing. And there's a place in the big book where it says, that we were living only, that we were existing only to drink. The only reason, the days of drinking and drugging for fun or for camaraderie or laughter or that feeling that life is good. All that stuff was completely gone. And the only reason I was drinking and the only reason I was drugging was trying my hardest to overcome this compulsion for more. That was it. I just had this insane idea that if I could get enough in, not that I would even feel good, but just that this compulsion for more would go away for a second or two, and I could just get a deep breath for a second. I was just at that place, and I existed like that for quite a while. I ended up getting hepatitis real bad, got really sick, and ended up in a situation at my mom's house, which hopefully I'll be able to share a little bit about that. But it was a horrible deal, horrible thing. I was 28 years old and called my mom, and she had to tell me, no, you can't come home because of the damage I'd done to the family. And I told her, no, Mom, you don't understand. I am sick. I have to come home. And she thought I was coming home to die. And she told me that. She thought that, my mother thought that, my mother is poor, and she's still poor to this day. And she's been gifted in that way, really. I mean, my mom just kind of doesn't care about money, and it's been a real good thing. She's been able to be of service in the lives of a lot of people because of that. But she started saving for my funeral when I came home. She didn't think I was going to make it. I was that sick. And I ended up getting a little bit better, and in front of there with my mom watching, I continued. Every time I got a little bit better, I would hit the bar and drink, and then the hepatitis would get really bad, and then I would be sick at her house for another 3 or 4 days, and then I would somehow con her boyfriend, or I would con my way into $20 or $30, and I would be gone again, and the whole time I was telling her I was clean. It was just a horrible situation. And I put that woman through hell, and I've made amends for that as well. And I'll share some of the amends with my mom when we get to amends, and we should be getting to amends probably Saturday night sometime. In the end for me, my last drink, I went to a place called the Buckaroo Tavern. And the Buckaroo Tavern was a lot like that hotel I described. It was those same group of people that would drink at the Buckaroo Tavern. And it's the same way now. Sometimes I'll tell that story and somebody will, and they'll say, oh, that Buckaroo, that's a yuppie joint. And Tom and I had that experience. He showed me this place where he used to drink, but he said, but it didn't used to be like that. Because I said, boy, that's a pretty nice place to drink. No, it wasn't then, And, but so some people said, oh yeah, the Buckaroo, that's kind of a yuppie joint now, but it wasn't then. And I was down to my last few dollars, and I had like maybe $3 to my name, and I didn't have enough money to re-up at the hotel I was at, so I packed my stuff with me, left that hotel room. I thought, well, I'll go to the Buckaroo Tavern. This is in the morning. They were just opening. I'll go to the Buckaroo Tavern, and I'll get a pint of beer, and somebody will show up. Somebody will show up, and there'll be somebody that maybe owes me a little favor. Like I can remind them, like, hey, remember when I was in the fat city? Remember I took care of you, buddy. And I was kind of hoping somebody like that would show up, or somebody would show up and just kind of maybe buy me a drink, and so I knew that was my only beer, and I couldn't drink it too fast because as soon as I wasn't buying, they were going to kick me out. And I was in that kind of shape that even in the Buckaroo Tavern, they had their eye on me. They were like, okay, we'll give you a beer. Sit over there and be quiet, and we'll give you a beer. And I was drinking my beer, and I got about halfway through my beer, and it started coming back up. And I ran out the door of the Buckaroo Tavern. I threw up on my way out, and that was my last drink. And I didn't get sober that day. That was my last drink. I continued to use for another day or 2 days, and I kind of lost track of time. And I really don't have a good recollection of the next several days. But I ended up behind a McDonald's in Seattle, and there's 2 buildings. There's a Viking bar that's called Hagar's, which means Norwegians and Swedes drink in there. There's this Viking bar named Hagar's, and then next door to that is the McDonald's. And in between, there's like this facade. So from the front, if you walked by, you'd think it was all connected one building. But if you go around behind in the parking lot, there's a space between that building that you can get in. And I'd found that space somehow, and I'd also been over behind a store digging around, and I found this big, huge piece of cardboard, and I'd kind of made a piece of cardboard lean thing between there so people couldn't see in. And I sat there and just kind of existed, and I was shooting speedballs, and I was telling Tom today that, and we'll talk about this more when I get to amends, that, I don't have any idea to this day where I got the money for that, because my memory was spending my last few dollars at the Buckaroo Tavern. And as I threw up, I got desperate and I did something, I don't know what. But I had money and I had drugs, and I sat there for a couple of days until, of course, I was out of money and drugs again, behind that McDonald's. And I could look out from that McDonald's. If I went out, I could look across. There was a big open parking lot, and there was an AA hall there. And the people from the AA hall would come out the back of the AA hall. This is actually the big back porch on this hall. It was called Fremont Hall in Seattle. And there was a big porch back there. And I could see the AA people there. And I'd been in and out of AA. I was in my first treatment center when I was 17, and I was on about number 5 at this time. And those are ones I finished. I checked into a lot of detoxes and stuff, and then when the fever was on, I would jet, within 24 hours. But I could see that AA hall, but then I just would go back and I'd sit there, and I could hear the drive-through too at the McDonald's. That was the thing that really freaked me out. I could hear the drive-through, and I could hear him say, "Yeah, I'll have a number 3 supersize with a Diet Coke." And then I'd think, "Oh my God!" And I think what they said was, "Hey, there's a freak back there shooting Coke. Somebody," and then the next guy, then I'd hear the next guy pull up, and I'd think they were saying, and then I'd think they were saying, "Call the FBI," and I'm thinking, "Oh my God," And I've since found out that the FBI doesn't have a huge budget for those kind of behind McDonald's guys. But I was convinced, that the federal government was involved somehow with my not being sober. But I knew a guy that I'd actually lived with as a kid. His family lived in the same neighborhood as where I started drinking, and I ended up at a time in my life, I ended up living. His family took me in, and I lived with his family for a period of time. So this guy was like a brother to me, and he was going to AA at that time, and he was going to that hall, and I knew it. I knew that he would be there if I would just go, and I knew the meetings were about 8 o'clock, and I kind of, well, what the hell else am I going to do? I'll go to that meeting. My friend Donner will be there. And he and his girlfriend, now it's his wife now, but it was his girlfriend at that time. They'll take me in, and they'll nurse me back to health on their couch like they'd done many times. And I had no intention of getting sober. I had no intention of wanting to be sober. I had no intention of trying to get sober. It just wasn't there. I mean, I wasn't even a want to guy. I was just a guy, I was just in so much fear of what would happen if I actually, had to get sober, of what that would be like. And my experience was always, that I would get sober for a period of time, and that deal we'll talk about. We're going to talk about that tonight when we come back in after the break, that restless, irritable, and discontent deal would happen. And I would get to a place where I was actually paralyzed with fear sober, and I would get to a place where I had to drink, It was either drink or kill myself. I mean, that was that would be what it would feel like for me to be sober. So I didn't want to get sober, but I just thought maybe I did need to kind of go through the withdrawals and get my habit down to a reasonable amount and nurse myself back to health and all those kind of things. And I went to that AA meeting and took a seat, and this guy that I was looking for didn't show up. And I was sitting in the meeting, and I just started crying, like alligator tears. And it was a silent deal too, I mean, I wasn't bawling, but I just had these tears, and I couldn't stop it. I didn't try to wipe my face. And I just didn't know what the hell I was going to do. I was thinking, well, I could rob a bank when the bank's open in the morning. That was really what I was thinking. I was thinking I could rob a bank. That would do it. That would give me a couple $1,000. That would maybe last a day or two. And I caused a little bit of a scene. Some people said some things, and I was, real dramatic. The junkie pride deal is really a dramatic condition. And like, I'm so hardcore, that kind of stuff. And you don't know what I've been through, and I've been shooting dope since I was a teenager. I really was kind of out of gas. And this guy came up, and I like to say this, that I learned about giving from an absolute expert, and he's a guy that I still spend time with today. I was just with him last week again, and he's over 30 years sober now, and he came up to me in that meeting and said, hey, my friends and I have been talking, and we'll make all the arrangements. If you want to go to detox, we'll give you a ride. We've already called down there and they got a bed. And of course, I'm thinking, well, I was thinking a couple things. I was thinking one about, maybe I better check my social calendar and make sure I can fit this detox deal in. And the other thing I'm thinking is, how the hell does this guy know I need to go to detox? And but it was that kind of a deal. I mean, they didn't ask, what's your situation? Nobody asked, are you homeless? Nobody asked. It was just that, they said, do you want to go to detox? And I said, well, yeah, I would go. And they took me to a detox in the next city up from Seattle, which is Everett in Snohomish County. And it's, I don't know what to compare it to here, but it's for, when you're strung out like that and you're drinking with that circle of friends, your world gets really small. And that was far enough removed from me to where I just didn't have the game to leave that detox and then panhandle the money and then try to get a couple buses all the way to Everett or all the way to Seattle and then try to find somebody something to steal and then try to find somebody to it just didn't have it in me. And so I got my first 5 days of sobriety at Evergreen Manor Detox in Everett, Washington. And that guy that drove me to the detox that night was there the night I got out. And he picked me up and he took me to his home. And then I could kind of hear his girlfriend saying, he was like, stay out here in the front room. I'm going to go talk to my girlfriend for a little bit. And I heard her saying, well, are you crazy? Have you seen this guy? And, what are you doing? And then, no goddamn way, no way, no way. And then he'd come in, okay, it's going to be all right. You'll be able to stay here for the night, And he let me stay there for the night. And this guy owned a car lot down on Highway 99. And it was the same area where I'd just been going through all that hotel stuff. And he owned a little car lot down there. And there was a little apartment that had been fixed up in the back of the car lot. And he took me down there the next day, and he said, well, listen, I'll let you stay here for a while, and there's some conditions, and you have to stay clean and sober. I have to go to the noon meeting, the 5 o'clock meeting, the 8 o'clock meeting. I'll give you a little work here at the car lot. And the reason I say I learned about giving from an expert is that guy gave me a place to stay. And it's emotional for me even to talk about this even today, 17 years later. Thinking about the size of that guy's heart. I didn't know this guy, never met him before in my life. He took me down to the car lot. He came by every morning for 6 months and bought me breakfast. Every morning for the first 6 months of my sobriety, Al would come, wake me up and say, hey, let's go up to the Jack in the Box. We'll get a breakfast jack and a cup of coffee. He was the first man I ever prayed with in my entire life. First guy that ever said, well, have you tried prayer? Let's do a little prayer. I'm so grateful to him and to his buddies. And he'd give me a few dollars, and again, that alcoholic, indignant deal. This was a guy, and now I've drove by, he doesn't own the car lot anymore. And I think part of the reason his business failed, is because he was giving all of his money to alcoholics. I really believe that. He was spending so much time on alcoholics, he wasn't really selling any cars. And, all the AAs were dropped by the car lot because it was a place for a free cup of coffee. I mean, it was just like a little mini AA hall at his car lot. And once in a while, he sold a car. If a customer would really come in and really try very hard, he would sell them a car. But, I drive by that car lot now and I look at it. It's a little tiny dirt lot. There's no pavement or anything. It's just like a little patch of dirt. And you can put about 8 or 10 cars on there at a time. And he would pay me every day to go out and start them up and kind of get the batteries going. Or maybe that tire, we'll take those snow tires off that car and there's some other tires out in the garage. Put them on there and, vacuum that car out, kind of clean it up and stuff. And at the time, this, being the self-centered person that I was, I thought, well, I know what's going on here. What we got here is we got this guy who kind of preys on these people who are down on their luck in AA, and he cleans them up, and then he kind of gets them to work for these slave labor wages down on his car lot for $5 an hour. And I'm thinking, doesn't he know I was a chief engineer on a goddamn fishing boat and made a fortune, and he expects me to work down here for $5 an hour? And that was constantly going through my head. And the grateful thing now today, looking through the spiritual eye, which we get here in AA, looking through the spiritual eye, and I drive by that lot and I see that he didn't need any help at all. He was partners in that business with his brother. There was 2 of them. He didn't need any help at all. This was completely, there wasn't enough cars there to need a lot boy, you know? And so it was completely from his heart. And, you know, I would work there, and I'd get a few bucks in my pocket, and I'd try my hardest not to get on the wrong side of a $20 bill. If I got about 15 bucks, I'd say, well, Al, I think I'll stop working right there and head up to the hall. It was working great for me for a period of time, but, you know, the anxiety built, and physically I was looking better. You know, I gained a little weight, and the lights were kind of back on in my eyes, and most of the people at the hall were kind of on to the next newcomer, and they weren't paying so much attention to me, and I started getting in this position where I started thinking, you know, the time and day is going to come for me. I'm going to drink again. I'd been through it so many times. And there was a group of guys that were kind of trolling the halls, and they called it that. You know, they called it trolling the bottom. And they would go by these halls late at night, 10 o'clock, midnight meeting, the low bottom hall. This Fremont hall, they call it the emergency room of AA. And they actually have a sign in there that says that, the emergency room of AA. And it's in a place in Highway 99 where there's probably about 75% of the people in the meetings at that hall are actually sober, and the rest are just street refuge people that are trying to get out of the cold, get a cup of coffee, and kind of hang out for a while, and then go back out. And so these guys would come by there, and they had this idea that their place in Alcoholics Anonymous, after having been through the steps, was to go to the meetings not to get anything, but to go to the meetings and look for the face of hopelessness and reach their hand out to the still suffering alcoholic as men who have a real answer. And that's what they did to me. These guys saw me there a few months sober, and I broke down in the meetings a few times and cried and said, you know, I'm just not getting it. And I was telling people, I'm going to drink again. I am going to drink again. I know it. I know I am going to drink again. And good, well-intentioned people in AA were coming up and saying, don't say that about yourself. That's not the way we do it around. Don't say that about yourself. But these guys said, yeah, you're damn right you will. You know, without a real answer, you will die sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we got an answer for guys like you. We're putting on a little workshop down at Fremont Baptist Church on Tuesday nights. And we're going to take people through the steps. And they also targeted my friend Patrick. And my friend Patrick, and I'll talk about him a little more this weekend too, but my friend Patrick was one day less sober than I. So I had one day more sobriety than Patrick. And Patrick was also sponsored by Al, the car lot guy, and Al was taking care of Patrick as well. And Patrick, I had for the most of the time, I'd been able to kind of come up with hotel rooms or people's couches to sleep on and stuff. But Patrick was really, truly right off of the skids. And he worked his way up and got sober, and Al was sponsoring him, and he'd got himself a little boarding room a few blocks from the car lot where he had a little room in a basement that he'd rented, and he had got himself a 10-speed bike. And you know, I was 28 at this time, almost 29, and Patrick was a few years older. It's hard to have your, you know, it's hard to have a lot of game, you know, down on Highway 99 when you're on your 10-speed, you know. It's like, but you still, you know, if you're alcoholic, you can still do it. You can still kind of have some, but you know, Patrick said, I'm going to go to that workshop, and he went down there. And he came back and said, oh, Kenny, he says, these guys are going to build a spiritual arch to which they're going to walk free, man. And I'm thinking in my mind, like, I'm thinking these guys are going to build this paper mache arch, and that was going to be the deal here, was that these guys were going to build this. And I was thinking, that's never going to work. I've been down to the altar church call deal before, and that's never going to work. Patrick. But at the same time, I wasn't going to let Patrick. You know, I was one day sober more than him, so I was kind of showing him the ropes, and we had the same sponsor, and so I was thinking, well, I'm damned if I'm going to let him get a leg up in sobriety on me. So I started going to that workshop with Patrick, and we would go to the workshop, we'd listen to these guys, and then we would deprogram each other after the workshop. We'd stand around, we'd say, that guy's so full of crap. He's just saying all that fancy stuff to impress the girls, and I don't think he's even done that stuff himself. I think he might even be drinking. We had all kinds of theories, and these guys can't possibly But, then we'd say, okay, well, we'll see you back here next Tuesday. And next Tuesday we'd be back, and we started going through that workshop. And I started having that experience with the steps. I loved what they were talking about. It was this message that had depth and weight. It's the message that we're going to talk about and spend some time with this weekend. And it absolutely, completely, and totally revolutionized my whole entire attitude and outlook upon life, changed the way that I live. I'm not the same person that I used to be, and there's a lot. I'll talk about the steps and stuff, but I'm going to do that in the course of as we kind of go through the steps this weekend. And the thing about that I will say is going through those steps, something happened to me. I had this experience, this desire to destroy myself with drugs and alcohol. Was removed somewhere along that way in that process, and I easily stay sober today. And it's not really a part of my life. I live in that 10-step promise of being in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. I live my life in that place today. I've got a beautiful family today. I'll talk to you about my family. I got a daughter that's 15 years old that's never seen me take a drink. My wife and I adopted a teenager, brought a teenager into our house, a kid that needed a hand up, and I'll talk about him. Brought him into my home. It's just kind of been the holiday season, and this last Thanksgiving, my entire family was at my house for Thanksgiving this year. My brother was there, my sister was there, my mom was there, my sister's 2 kids were there, my brother's girlfriend was there, my wife's sister was there. The whole family was at my house. And I absolutely ruined a few Thanksgivings, and I showed up at a Thanksgiving in the kind of shape I was like when I was in that hotel room. And I was thinking, I can't spend too much time in the bathroom. So I came up with this ingenious plan on a Thanksgiving day at my grandparents' house, where I had preloaded and taped a bunch of syringes to my legs. And I went to Thanksgiving dinner that way, so that I could quickly just go in the bathroom and get a fix. And, like every 15 minutes, oh, excuse me, I'll be right back. And I'd head for the bathroom. And, it was destroying my family to watch what was going on. And it was a horrible situation. And I was sitting there, they were passing everything around, and everybody was eating. And, of course, I didn't really feel like eating much. But I was sitting there, and I was just looking like I was getting ready to die right there at the table. And they said, well, what's wrong, Ken? How come you're not eating? And I said, well, I think I left my fork in one of the dishes that went around, and my fork was in my hand. And I said, and that was Thanksgiving. And then there were several, and that just kind of broke the whole thing down. The whole family just kind of, holy cow, Ken, what are you doing? And do you have to be so out of it? And and then there were several Thanksgivings that I didn't show up for. And the heartbreaking thing about those Thanksgivings is there wasn't one Thanksgiving that didn't go by that I didn't say I would be there. There was a lot of those Thanksgivings where I said I would be there, and I planned to be there, and I just couldn't get out of the house. And then I would stop answering the phone. And then I wouldn't talk to the family for weeks or months after that. And today, I've got this family, and all of those same people that were at Thanksgiving then came. And Tom and I were talking about this a little bit, that my family saw me at my very worst condition. They saw me a couple times in detoxes and when I was in horrible condition. And even now, 17 years later, when I say I need to go to a meeting, they are just like, oh, yeah, man, come on, what can we help you out? Is there anything we can do? They just think it's the greatest thing in the world. They just think that this is the greatest deal in the world. They don't ever question why I'm continuing to do this or why I do it to the level that I am, because they've seen this dramatic change happen. And we'll talk a little bit this weekend, too, about it's a little bit deep maybe for right now, but there is a connectedness. We are all connected, and especially to our families. We're connected, and if you don't have a family, you can come make AA your family. But we are connected. And my experience was that, and maybe there's a few Al-Anons in the room that might not agree with this, but I'll talk to Juanita about this after and see what she thinks. But I have a belief that I made people sick, and I don't care what anybody says. I know that I made my family sick, and I could do it today. If I was to go home from this retreat, start yelling at my kid, and yelling at my wife, and drinking it, my family would get sick. I made those people sick. And that connectedness thing, my mom, and we'll talk about my mom a little bit more. My mom was sober quite a while when I was in those hotel rooms. She lived in Vancouver, Washington, which is about a 3-hour drive. She would get off work Friday night, and she would drive all the way up to Seattle and just drive up and down, up and down, up and down all of those cheesy hotels, just hoping to see me. She had no idea, just hoping to see me. Just crazy, out of her mind. The thing about that is that for the most part, none of my family have been going to AA. None of my family have worked any steps. And you know what? When I see my family on Thanksgiving, they're better. I worked the steps, and they got better. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's a really big deal we got here. I want to let everybody know that they can just really relax here this weekend. We're going to have a great weekend. I've got some really neat stuff planned. I'll say it again for the people that came in towards the end. I'll kind of lay out a little bit. People, I think, like to kind of get a vision of where we're going. I do this with my sponsees when I'm sponsoring people. I don't ever just kind of hit them with something. I always kind of say, well, this is kind of how it's going to work. This is the timing we're on. This is what we're going to be looking at here in the next few weeks. And we'll take a break here in a few minutes. I think there's something a little funny about the smoking policy, so maybe somebody will make a announcement about that. But we'll take a break for people to smoke and use the restrooms. And I like to have a timekeeper at these retreats. It's helpful for me. So we'll turn the mic off here in a minute. But before we break up, we'll get a timekeeper to help us keep time. What that person does is just kind of go out and tell the people, okay, break's over, let's come back in and remind people of when the next session is and that kind of thing. We're going to come back in a little bit, and we're going to start cracking the book. We'll crack the book. I'm going to share some of my experience with you. We will have a time for questions and answers. I think I just kind of talked now, so I don't imagine there's a lot of questions yet. But we'll do a little first step deal. We'll have a time for questions and answers. We'll take another break. We'll just do, I think we're just going to do one more. What time is it? It's 8 o'clock. We'll see what happens. We'll do one more session. We'll probably go till about 9:30 or 10 o'clock tonight. And then I think tomorrow morning we're going to start again at 9 o'clock. And we'll let everybody know what the schedule is from there. But my plan is, while I'm thinking about it, I'll tell you really a little bit about the retreat here. Is this, and that's that, I really have come to a place where I really believe that these retreats are not actually working the steps. I think we kind of drive ourselves a little crazy when we try to really get the full 12-step experience in a weekend. It's too much, too quick. So there's a deal on page 55 that caught my attention a few years ago. And I'm paraphrasing here a little bit. I would open it up, but I'm too lazy to walk over and open my book. It says that, if our testimony helps to sweep away prejudice, it encourages you to search diligently, to think honestly, to search diligently within yourself, then you can join us. And then it goes on to say, with this attitude, you cannot fail. And that's really what I think these weekends are about. I think these weekends are about a group of people coming together. And my purpose as the facilitator is try to accomplish that, try to encourage you to search diligently, to think honestly, to be open-minded. They say some of these things, they actually say, with this attitude, you cannot fail. If we accomplish that in a weekend, there's people that will leave this retreat that will not fail. There's people that will leave this retreat and stay sober for life. I'm convinced of that. That first workshop that I went through, there was a big group of us that started. There was about a dozen of us that finished that workshop. And those workshops, we meet once a week for an hour and a half, and it'll take us about 6 to 8 months to get all the way through the 12 steps in the workshops that I do. Those ones actually took a little longer. We were probably there a year, but there was about 12 of us that finished. One of the gals actually died just last year, died of a drug overdose, and that left 11. And as far as I know, all of those other 11, myself included, Patrick was included, my first step sponsor, Jeffrey, was included. I could go on and name the rest of them. But, they're all still sober here 17 years later. There's a huge difference. And And we'll see that. There's a huge difference. If you think you're in the solution because you're in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're not. It doesn't, being in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and being in the solution are two different things. These people, we came through the steps and we got in the solution, and we've stayed continuously sober as a group of people. And they're lifelong friends, these people. I mean, I see them and we light up every time we see each other. The idea of that, too, is that in our traditions, the third tradition says, the only requirement is a desire to stop drinking. That's the only requirement for membership in AA. But if you want to look at recovery from alcoholism, there's some requirements, and we're going to look at those this weekend. If you really want to recover from alcoholism, have a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, there's some requirements, and you don't have to do them. And also I want to say this too, that through this weekend, I am completely comfortable with people getting up and going and using the bathroom or taking a break, because we might have some sessions that'll go a little long and people get sore butts, and it's hard. Some people can, like, I'm a guy that I just go to these retreats myself and I just sit and I just absorb it. I don't miss any sessions. I'll go to all of them. My wife will maybe go to some she's going to sleep, some she'll go read a book, and she can't do the whole weekend. I go to a convention and I'll try to do every step workshop, and she'll do maybe 2, so I completely understand if people get up and stretch and during, if we're talking or we're doing stuff. I just want people to know that's within the bounds. It's not, it doesn't offend me in the least. It shouldn't disturb anybody. We should just really have kind of a open door policy. So if you feel like you're uncomfortable and you got to get up and leave for a minute, please do that. So we'll meet back here in 15 minutes. Don't go yet, but I'm going to turn off the mic here, and then we're going to elect a timekeeper and see if there isn't any other housekeeping announcements. Thanks for being very prompt with the 15-minute break. And one of our mentors used to say that I don't think he said I think he said the most important time at these retreats is the time in between the sessions when everybody's just standing around visiting. So we'll try to make sure that we get plenty of that this weekend, and that there's plenty of time for everybody to kind of process, because some of the stuff we're going to get to will be a little bit heavy. So each session, tomorrow I'll bring a chime. Each session we'll start a chime. I didn't bring it tonight. And then we'll have about a minute or two of just silent meditation before each session starts. And as we go through the weekend too, we're going to have some longer meditations that will be completely voluntary. There won't be anything mandatory about it. And it'll be the same thing. I'll try to really describe what we're going to do before we go there. So we'll find out if there's people that have never meditated before. We'll give some little instructions for meditation, but we'll try to realize a couple of things here that I'll say before I forget, and that is that a couple of statements of truth. And one of the statements of truth is that I love you. I love you because you saved my life. I love you because, you've placed me in this position to be here with you this weekend, and you've shown up to listen to what I have to say, and it's very humbling for me to be in this position. I want to tell you another statement of fact, and that is that God is here, that we don't have to do anything to any amount of prayer or any amount of meditation or any amount of silence to bring about the presence of God, that has already been taken care of in advance for us. I want to say that this is a sacred place. And this is a sacred place because it's a sacred place for a lot of reasons. It's a sacred place because it's this nice retreat and convention center that I believe is owned by a Baptist church. Is that right? I should know where I'm at.
It was.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
But as you travel around the country, you'll realize something. And when I'm talking about sacred space, that communities everywhere create these kind of spaces. There are retreat centers and places all over the country, and there's very rarely a town that doesn't have some kind of a center where people can kind of go to do spiritual work. And we live in a society that really supports us. So it's a sacred place because it's been created for groups like us to get together and to come and to seek to know and do God's will in our lives. But even more than that, it's sacred because we have chosen this place. It's sacred because we are here. Each individual person, has brought a level to this place that makes it sacred. We've chosen this place and this weekend to bring some of our problems, some of the difficulties in our lives, some of those kind of things we've chosen this weekend to bring those ideas or to retreat from those ideas and come here. So I just wanted to say that so I didn't forget. Just a couple of statements of fact so we can get a few things clear and out of the way as to what it is we're doing here. So with that, we're going to do just a minute or two of meditation, and we'll just keep it real short. Maybe do just a 1 minute silent meditation, and I'm going to bring us out of that with this prayer that's on the board here. You don't need to follow along with that if you don't want to, or if you might not even be able to read it. But I'll bring us out of that with this retreat prayer that I've written up here, and then we'll talk about the retreat prayer, and we'll go from there. God, as we retreat, as we withdraw from, all we see is hazardous, all we see is unpleasant, all we see is difficult. As we retreat from positions in our thinking, in our attitudes, in our knowledge, let us rest this weekend in this place of privacy, in this place of safety, in prayer, meditation, and study. Allow this retreat to deepen our awareness of life, our sense of humor, our love for everything and for all, and our desire to live the spiritual life. Amen. So, this retreat prayer, we talked a little bit in the last session about what retreat means. I know some few people came in, so we'll go over it a little bit. But retreat can mean a lot of things. It can mean, we talked about this 12 steps being a treatment for alcoholism. The 12 steps are specifically designed, our AA 12 steps are specifically designed to treat this human problem of alcoholism. And they do a great job of that. So they are a treatment. And some people have been through the steps and have experienced the same things that I've experienced, which is that, having gone through the steps, I will have had this spiritual awakening. I'll be working with others. I'll be kind of living in 10, 11, and 12. And there seems to be kind of two schools of thought on this. And neither one is right or wrong. We're not really going to try to get into too much right or wrong issues here this weekend. And I'll tell you why, because you've asked an interesting guy to come and share for a whole weekend on AA, and the interesting thing about it is that I will come right out and tell you that I have been wrong about almost everything in my entire life. So you need to take what I have to say with a grain of salt. And I will tell you that, and we'll talk about this more this weekend, but I was wrong about my mother. I was wrong about my father. I was wrong about my brother and my sister. I was wrong about my grandfather. I was wrong about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was wrong about the 12 steps. And I was wrong about my employer. I was wrong about Al down at the car lot. I was wrong about NA. I was wrong about I was wrong about God. I was wrong about a spiritual awakening. I was wrong about you all in the, kind of the big book AA people. So that having been said, we're not going to. It's difficult for me to draw hard, fast lines of what's right and wrong, isn't it? When I come right out with what the truth is, which is that Kenny is a person that consistently in his life has had a difficulty looking at differentiating the truth from the false. So that's my deal. So I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong here. I'm just saying there is two schools of thought on this, and I'll tell you where I currently come from. This one school of thought is that we work the steps once, and then we live in 10, 11, and 12, and that is very good. My experience is that I live through these first 9 steps, living in 10, 11, and 12. Eventually the ego rebuilds itself, and I start once more living in this place of restless, irritable, and discontent. And I have consistently found it necessary to retreat from these positions in my thinking, my attitudes, and my knowledge, the things that I think that I know. I've consistently needed to retreat from things in my life that are difficult, hazardous, unpleasant. And I've needed to kind of take a rest, and that's the retreat. I went through that workshop that I talked about. That was the treatment. And I've had to come back and do these retreats. So that's part of it. It's also like a withdraw from. I happen to read a lot of spiritual material. One of the guys I really have kind of gone back to over and over because I really like his stuff, and I'm not making any endorsements here, and I won't do that at all this weekend to any particular brand of spirituality or anything. But one guy that I've come back to is a guy named Emmett Fox. And what Emmett Fox says is that the door to the soul opens inward. And what that means is you need to withdraw, to retreat, to get away for a weekend, and just retreat. Say, hey, I'm an open-minded person. I'll go to this retreat. I'll do these things. And the door to the soul opens inward. And if you looked at this door and that door, they open outwards because they have a law that says that door has to open outwards. I know that's why that door is that way. Because when people panic, what do? They push in the physical life. Well, in the spiritual life, it's just the opposite. We retreat in the spiritual life. We withdraw. You got to relax. In the spiritual life, when you push and push and push and push, you're doing something, and it's just, you're pushing. In the spiritual life, the door just closes tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. It just makes it worse. So this is the idea here this weekend. I talked in the first session a little bit about my mother, and for some reason I just feel compelled. This is kind of the something that maybe I would normally do on a Sunday, but I just thought I'd just pull out the big guns right away. So, just to give you an idea of where we're going, this session is going to be the time that we'll spend talking on the first step, and this is out of context a little bit. And my mind kind of works that way, so you'll notice that we'll move around here a little bit this weekend. But we will get through, and we will talk about each one of the steps to the best of our ability. I actually don't know how far we'll get, but I will tell you this Sunday morning we're going to talk about the 12th step. That's really why I came here, was for what I have to share with you on Sunday morning. So if you've got plans for Sunday morning and you can change them, try to be here. And if you can't, I'm happy that this is being taped, I guess. So, because I've got some really neat, amazing things to share with you about the 12-step work that's happened in my life. And just so we're clear about this, and like I told you, I like to let people know where we're going. I've done this retreat. I've many times. I've been sponsored by several different people in my sobriety. I've found somebody that has what I want, and I will ask them to take me through the steps. I'm being sponsored by a guy right now that doesn't necessarily adhere to completely this big book deal, and that was really good for me because when he started sponsoring me, he said about in the first or second time we met, he said, Kenny, you know way too much about that big book. So we're going to go all the way through the steps, and we're not ever going to crack that big book. So next time you come, leave your big book at home. And it's been a wonderful experience for me. But just so you know where we're going here, that I've been through the steps with him in a lot of different ways and in retreats. I've listened to a lot of different people. I told Tom and Juanita about an experience that I had going and sitting through a deal where you actually work all 12 steps in one weekend, and it was really kind of an insane deal. But I went into it open-minded. It's not my deal. These retreats, we're not actually going to work all 12 steps because it's just. But we're going to get a vision of what your life would look like if you did work all 12 steps. You will have that when you leave here Sunday, if you put the time in. So the point is that, and the reason we're going to get to where we're going on Sunday is this, that no matter how many times you work the steps, it always leads to the same place. And we forget about this. Sometimes we think that I'm going to work the steps and my problems are going to get better. I'm going to do this. The 12 steps, as designed, as near as I can tell, always lead to looking for the face of hopelessness and reaching your hand out to a still suffering alcoholic. That's really the whole deal here. All of the rest of this work that we're going to do is in preparation for that. And, one of the great mentors in AA, and a guy that's gone now, but I heard a lot of people call him, they called him one of the great AA sponsors. And he said that. He said, this isn't the work. This puts us in fit spiritual condition to do the work. And I just inherently know that to be true. That all of the 12-step work that I did wasn't, I lived a pretty poor, selfish, self-centered way of life for a lot of years. And this spiritual experience that I've had, I believe is meant for me, but it's not meant for me only. There's a much bigger picture here going on. And it's the same way with this retreat. This retreat is for the people who are here, but wouldn't it be sad if it was only for the people that are here? It is for the people who are here, but it's not for you only. The purpose of this retreat is that we come and we retreat, we go through the steps, and we are going to be people that leave this retreat with a real answer, and we're going to be people that go to meetings, not to try to get something out of the meeting, but go to the meeting looking to bring something to the party. I'm going to be a guy that goes to the meeting, and when I see the face of hopelessness, I'm going to go up and make an introduction, be a guy who makes the approach. And so that's really the bigger picture, is that, my vision would be that this retreat will touch a whole lot of people that aren't even here this weekend. It doesn't really matter how many people come to this retreat. Tom and Juanita said, I don't know how many people will be at the retreat. Could be 20, could be a lot more. We don't know how many it could be. And it didn't matter, because I know what the real purpose is. The book says you may be but one man with this book in your hand. It started with just one guy with this idea that maybe if he helped another alcoholic, he could stay sober himself. So the fact that we've got this many people for this weekend is, the ramifications are really quite huge. So I'm glad that we're here. I'm glad we've kind of established where we're going, that we will get to the 12th step by Sunday. And I told you I'd bring out the big guns right away, so I will. But because I talked about my mother in my talk here. I talked about the time that I spent down there, and I ended up leaving her house, and I wasn't sober, and that was before that deal with the McDonald's, and I think that motel deal had already happened, and I kind of ended up down at my mom's sometime in between that and the Buckaroo Tavern and existing behind the McDonald's. But I showed up at her house in just absolutely terrible condition at my mother's home, and she didn't want to let me in. I called her, and she said, no, you can't come. And I said, Mom, I am, and she just heard it in my voice. I said, Mom, I'm sick. I need to come home. And she knew. She said, okay, come. And I came. I called my brother. He met me at a restaurant to kind of be the mediator. I actually had called my brother and asked if I could come to his house. And he said, no, I've got kids, and I can't have you around, but I will meet you at a restaurant and just kind of hear you out. So he met me at a restaurant, and then he called my mom for me and said, well, listen, Kenny does need a place to go. And I showed up at my mom's house. My brother Jeff had given me a ride. This is an email that I got from my mother. It's dated December 7th, 2005, which was 16 years after I showed up. And actually, I continued using it, so it's probably about 17 years after I showed up at my mom's doorstep. My mom does a lot of spiritual work. She's Reiki mastered. She's a real kind of a woo-woo earth mother, and And we really love her in my family. But she does a lot of volunteer. She does this TIP thing. And what TIP is it's trauma, intervention, and prevention. And she goes to the scenes of horrific accidents. And she just has this peace. Oh, I didn't know that was going to come. But she just has this real peace about her. That she can go into these horrible situations. And talk to the mother of the kid who's just been killed in a car accident. Or go to these suicide scenes and talk to people. And the police in the city that she lives call her when they've had one of these situations and say, Nanette, would you come? And she will go and just kind of hold a place, for these people. So anyways, she wrote me this note, just an email out of the blue. And it says, Hi, Kenny. Once a month, we have a mandatory TIP continuing education class for 4 hours. And last night, our speaker was from a police unit that had just put together a really remarkable film on the meth epidemic here. Several police officers had done this on their own, and now it's getting accolades everywhere. In one segment, they showed mugshots of quite a few meth addicts who had all agreed to be filmed, with the mugshots at different times and different arrests. You could see the huge difference in their looks in a matter of a few months or a few years. One of the men they showed somehow reminded me of you, Kenny. He was handsome and had eyes that showed just incredible sadness. And his pictures, over a period of several years, got progressively worse and worse. In the last picture of him, he looked so much like you did when you were trying so hard to kick heroin at my house here in Vancouver. When Jeff brought you over that night, I would not have recognized you, and it was all I could do not to sob right in front of you. The man in the film looked just like that. Haunted eyes, sunken face, stooped posture, hopelessness. I prayed all the way home in gratitude. I don't think I've ever completely told you of how much I love God, even if it was for only one thing, bringing my son back home to me and giving him life and sustaining him. I know this isn't the best venue to tell you how I'm feeling, but I didn't want to wait until I see you again. I just want you to know that I'm grateful that you came to me that night, and that somewhere and somehow along the way after that you found God. So that's like the dramatic difference, in my life from showing up at my mom's place and forcing this woman to start saving for my funeral to where I'm at in my life today. I don't know, I just felt compelled to read that now, and I'm glad I did. I am now actually going to crack the big book, which is one of the reasons why we're here. And I'm not going to try to read too much directly out of the big book. I don't want to just read the big book to you. I just do want to get an idea of who I'm talking to. And this group, it's unfortunate this group is too large. I'd like to go around and just kind of give everybody a minute or two. But if we did that, we'd be here for the next 2 hours without getting around the room. So we're just going to shorten the version a little bit. So how many people are here tonight that have been through the 12 steps and are actually working with others now? So that's a majority. That's really great that we've got that here for the weekend. And how many people are in the steps currently and not the people that have already raised your hands? How many people that didn't already raise their hands are here and are currently working the steps with a sponsor? And then how many people are here that have not begun the process of working the steps yet? Well, very good. So, and that kind of gives me an idea how we can proceed here too. So, I'm not going to do too much like direct reading the big book to you this weekend. We can save that. At most, it would appear that the majority of the people here have already done that, and if they haven't, they've got sponsors that are taking them through that process right now. So, there's a really good core here in Santa Fe. There's a great core with that Monday night meeting. And if I had this to do over again, and I actually thought about this, I would switch it up and I would come on maybe I'd come on a Friday and stay till a Monday and go home on a Tuesday so that I could come to your Monday night group. And someday I will. I'll make a point of coming because I just hear great things. There was a group of people that came over to Tom and Juanita's house and had a little potluck on Thursday night, and they shared with me the format of the meeting. And so you've really got this great base of recovery. So for most of us, we're going to be kind of going through this retreat process that we talk about, but I'm going to leave it all in simple enough terms that this retreat would help, or this set of tapes will help anybody that goes through this. I will tell you that if I was sponsoring you, just to get this out front, what we would do is we would meet once a week, and we would meet for an hour and a half, and I would read the book to you, and we would start at that title page. We'd start off with we wouldn't be using this retreat prayer. We'd be using a prayer that I use called the set-aside prayer that I think several of you know, but that's not terribly important. We start with a prayer. I give them a few things that they can kind of use in their life, and we start with the 3 legacies of AA, of unity, service, and recovery, and a prayer, and we start going forward. We look at all the forwards, and we just kind of do this deal where we have had this idea that the solution for alcoholism is contained in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. That if you want to know about Alcoholics Anonymous, you read the book. And I will take people through that book the same way that group of people in that workshop took me through that book. And we're going to go through it just one paragraph at a time. If there's a word we don't understand, we're going to look it up in the dictionary. We use pens and highlighters, so we're people that color in our books, and we make sure that we not only do we look at that, but we do everything that it says all the way along. And the people that wrote this book had these experiences, these experiences where they say, the great truth is just this and nothing less, that we've had these experiences that have revolutionized our whole attitude and outlook upon life, and they say they've been rocketed into a 4th dimension of which we'd not even dreamed, and we can recreate that experience. They've left this book that shows us precisely how they have recovered, and one of the things that I've really come to believe, doesn't matter where you're at in the literature, it doesn't really even matter, I don't think, what 12-step fellowship that you're in. And I do carry this message to people that whether it's AA or Al-Anon or NA or one of any of the other 12-step recovery groups, I think you should be interested in where that came from. And this book that we're looking at this weekend, this is the grandmother of all 12-step programs. There was not 12 steps before Bill sat in his kitchen and wrote the 12 steps out, and they were published in this book for the first time in history. So you should be interested in that, regardless of what other literature is out there, to come back to this core deal where they say, we're going to show you precisely how we have recovered. And these are people who found permanent sobriety. And so if you're interested in that, the idea is that you go through this book paragraph by paragraph, and you do everything that it says. And it's a big book do instead of a big book study. And you do everything that the book says all the way along. So when it gets to the 3rd step, we do a 3rd step. And when it gets to inventory, we do inventory. And so that's what will happen if I sponsor you. Here this weekend, it's going to be different. We're going to have to kind of, digest some big chunks along the way rather quickly. So we're going to do that starting in the 1st step. And there's a couple of things that we'll look at. The first thing that I think we'll look at, we'll just jump right up into the doctor's opinion. And, we're leaving behind the forwards to the 1st edition, the circle and triangle. And we're doing that kind of intentionally. We're doing that strictly for the amount of time that we have and kind of the place that this group is at, too. I'm in a 3rd edition here, and I should have brought a 4th edition so I had the right page number. But I think there's only one page difference. So in the 3rd edition, I'm at 26, page 26 in Roman numerals in the 3rd edition. For those of you that have your books and want to follow along, you can. I think it'd be 27 in the 4th edition, and that's the bottom paragraph says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The doctor's opinion had some great things about it. It was written in 2 different letters. And the first letter, the history of AA tells us, was written by Dr. Silkworth. And if you go back and read that, and I'm just putting this in context, this paragraph, if you go back and read that, it's pretty light stuff. It's kind of, these guys did, you can rely on what they have to say, and it's, it's almost an endorsement, but not completely. And, these guys had an experience. If you go back and look at the forward to the 2nd edition, one of the big things that happened for both of these guys was this doctor's opinion had a huge effect on Bill Wilson. And Bill Wilson went down and was talking with a guy, Dr. Bob, who had repeatedly tried spiritual means to solve his alcoholic dilemma but had failed. So this guy knew what the answer was. He knew that the answer was in the spiritual life. He was with a group of people that made amends and admitted their shortcomings and believed in helpfulness to others and dependency on God. He was with a group of people like that before, but he couldn't stay sober until Bill gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness. He got that hopelessness, and that's really what our first step is. You know, people have known what the answer was for a long time, but Dr. Silkworth just was a guy that was able to put the problem in these concise terms. And after he wrote that first letter, which was just a little short of one page, they said, "Come on, Silky, you know, we know you're holding out on us here." And he was a little reluctant to endorse the spiritual way of life because he was a very prominent, well-known doctor in his field of treating alcoholics and drug addicts. And he did not feel comfortable in exposing himself to saying, "Hey, there's a certain type of alcoholic that we really can't help. We don't even know what to do with these people." And the answer is probably a spiritual answer. But when he wrote this second letter, he really let it fly. And he just laid it all out there that you know, these are people who need an entire psychic change, and there's very little hope of their recovery. And he goes on to say that, you know, these powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge, and that this solution must come from a power greater than themselves. And if they are to recreate their lives, he uses this language in here that's very powerful spiritual language coming from a doctor of his time. And then he goes on to say in there that he clarifies it for a minute. He kind of catches himself in this letter, and he says, "Hey, if any of you guys are wondering why I'm endorsing this deal, you know, why don't you," I'd like to use different words, but, you know, why don't you come down here to Towns Hospital and see the despairing children and the sad wives and the hopeless condition and you know, that I deal with in my every single day and even in my sleeping moments. Come down here to Towns Hospital sometime in New York City if you don't like the fact that I'm endorsing the spiritual answer. So that's kind of the shortness of the doctor's opinion, but it's kind of like a synopsis. But I think if we were to really draw it down even to a shorter thing than that, it would be this one paragraph. This one paragraph, I really think, is the doctor's opinion in a nutshell. That one paragraph, if you were to pick a singleness of purpose that he had and you only could pick out one paragraph, it would be this. This was the doctor's opinion. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the truth from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontent until they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity after they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. I really think that's kind of the doctor's opinion in a nutshell. All of the rest of what he's doing is brought to a place where he can format that one paragraph. And this paragraph, the first time I read that, and I'm reading it tonight in case there's anybody that maybe hasn't completely diagnosed themselves, to realize that if I was doing this work with you, it'd be over a process of several weeks that we would do this. But, you know, that is it in a nutshell. You know, if that describes you, and it described me perfectly what was going on with me. That when I was sober, I was restless, irritable, and discontent. That eventually sober, I would succumb to the desire for a drink. And for me, sometimes, you know, it would take weeks or months. I've had the experience with a lot of people in AA that this process took years before they got to that succumb to the desire for a drink. Once I take a drink, then I break out in this phenomenon of craving, which is what I talked about in my talk, you know, this compulsion for more becomes paramount to anything else. That I'm not drinking to have a good time anymore. I'm drinking to overcome a compulsion for more. That's the phenomenon of craving. If when you put some in, you break out in a craving for more, you might be an alcoholic. That's what the book says. And it says that we emerge from this deal remorseful. Like that first time that I had a drink, and over and over and over and over again, I emerged remorseful. And then it said the scary part. It said that we emerged from that with this firm resolution never to drink again. And it said this is repeated over and over. And I know when I read that and I was in that workshop, I knew I was going to drink again. And this kind of told me that. It was almost, there was something about this that out of that hopelessness was born hope. Because I knew it, and then here it was in the book. And that I knew that maybe AA wasn't, I thought AA was kind of for people who could stop drinking. It was kind of a club where people who didn't drink could get together. And I just didn't ever fit in because my problem was I couldn't stop drinking. I couldn't stop no matter what I would drink. And this told me the deal that I realized that I was one more time, with all that help from Al and all the help from the people down at the club, that one more time I was in a firm resolution not to drink again. And the scary thing about being in a firm resolution that I'll never take another drink is that this is repeated over and over is the next sentence. And unless the person experiences an entire psychic change, that's what the 12 steps bring about. Psychic is the mind. This is a psychiatrist that was writing this, so I'm quite sure of the particular definition that he meant by that. Psychic is the mind. Unless I have a completely change in the way of my thinking, I will return to drinking. I think that's what he's saying here. And so I kind of got that. I kind of got that hopelessness. And that's the same thing that Dr. Bob got. Dr. Bob understood for the first time that firm resolution never to drink again didn't mean anything when it came to a real alcoholic. That he had those firm resolutions all the time, and that it was repeated over and over again. And then I'm going to point out just a couple things in Bill's story, starting on page 5. There's a deal in Bill's story, and it says, and I looked at Bill, and I think you guys, there's kind of a common thing that we do in the big book in our circle, and that's that when I have somebody look at Bill's story, those first 8 pages of Bill's story, which is, Bill's story is 16 pages. There's 8 pages of his drinking and 8 pages of him sober. And I don't know if that was coincidence or not, but I think it's kind of, it's just a really neat way to realize that half of his story is about recovery. And I mentioned that in my talk, I think, tonight, how grateful I am that I actually have this part of my story now about what happened and what it's like now, that I had an experience with these steps and that this is what my life is like now. That's what happened. And Bill was the same way. But those first 8 pages are his drinking. So I usually have people go through and underline everything of how I felt, thought, drank, and used compared to Bill's story. And when I did that, I kind of came up with Kenny's story. I mean, I had all this stuff underlined, and things just started coming to life. And Bill was a stockbroker in New York City. He was a married guy. He still had a house, although I think he was getting ready to lose everything. But he still had a house, and he still had maybe there wasn't much game left. But he went when he's talking about going to war. He was talking about World War I, and I just didn't think I'd ever really relate to this guy. And I started really looking at his story from that place of the hopelessness in the doctor's opinion. And I just fell in love with Bill. And I'm still that way today. I'm in love with the first 8 pages of Bill's story because of the hopelessness that man felt. And and the miracle that this was the guy who founded AA. And you don't have to wait for this deal. You don't have to wait to be sober a long time to get this deal. You just that little coming from that place of hopelessness to this place of recovery is a pretty quick deal. Clint talks about one day I was drinking, and the next day I was sober, and he says, "Man, that's moving right along, if you ask me." And here's this deal on page 5. It said, "I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did." So here's this guy who was an alcoholic, who can't stop drinking. He's been in and out of the hospital several times. His wife's heard it I mean, how many times did Lois probably hear that I'll never drink again? I mean, how many times? Yeah. I think we could say it was dozens, maybe more. Maybe it was hundreds. I don't know, but it was probably at least dozens. But something happened this time to Bill. It was different this time. Happily, my wife observed that this time I meant business. This is a guy that said that firm resolution, I'm not ever going to drink again, and I mean it this time. And his Lois says, oh my God, finally he means it. He's really going to quit drinking this time. What a great thing. I can see it in Bill that he means this deal. And he goes on to and I'll tell you one more thing. I actually had an opportunity a couple years ago to go back to Akron, Ohio. And in the intergroup in Akron, Ohio, in the intergroup office, they have an unbelievable archives there in the intergroup in Akron. If you ever get the opportunity. I've seen the archives in New York at Central Office, and I'm not making a judgment which one's better or anything, but they're both amazing. But that Akron office really had the bigger impact on me. They have a copy of Bill Wilson's family Bible at the Akron Intergroup. And in his Bible, there was a deal in, I'm losing the word for a second, but what was the Prohibition? In Prohibition, there was kind of a popular movement of what they called taking the pledge. The Washingtonians would take the pledge, and they had 100,000 sober at one time. And, it was kind of but even after the Washingtonians, that still was kind of a popular way to do it. You would say, I'm not ever going to drink again so long as I live. And you would write in the Bible, and you would sign it in your family Bible. That was, and if you did that, well, of course, you'd never drink again. And so, I saw that in the Akron Intergroup, this copy of Bill Wilson's family Bible. I promise I will never take another drink so long as I live, Bill Wilson. And then it hit me. I knew what this meant. I had written lots of sweet promises. He had written lots of sweet promises in his Bible. And the thing about that Bible that's at the Akron Intergroup is Bill wrote that more than once in his Bible. And, I related to that desperate place that he must have been. But this was different than those sweet promises. It was different than when he signed the Bible and took the pledge. Something was different this time. He really meant it. He really meant it. And then what's the next line in the book? Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. And I loved Bill Wilson from the moment I read that. Because that's where I was at. And I didn't really know that that's what AA was about. I really didn't. I didn't know that AA was for this hopeless type alcoholic. This person that can't quit. And this is Bill Wilson trying willpower. He had plenty of willpower. I know what that's like to make the decision to stop and really want to and go through all those withdrawals and go through all that torture and all that stuff and get the family all, and then to not make it. And to just think like, what is wrong with me? I really wanted to. I can't believe I'm back here. That deal with pounding on the bar. So here's that deal with the, that was self-will. And there's a couple other things that didn't work for me, and they didn't work for Bill either. The second one is on page 7. This is Bill going into treatment, learning all about alcoholism, and he had this brother-in-law that was a physician, Lois's brother, and he was able to kind of pull some strings. That's how Bill got into Towns Hospital so many times, was his brother. His brother-in-law would kind of pull a few strings and get Bill in over there and pay for it. Towns Hospital was not a free deal it was far from a free deal. It was for people you had to pay to go there, and they'd detox you and bring you off the booze. And it says, here's Bill coming out of treatment. And it said, it relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. He knew how come self-knowledge wasn't going to work. He knew that now. He said, understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. And I have no idea what that means. I know it means that, for 3 or 4 months, everything went great and he was getting money and stuff, but I don't know what that means to hang the goose high. So somebody can tell me sometime if they, what that expression means. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. This time I know I've got the knowledge of why the self-knowledge won't fail. I've learned all about alcoholism, and I've been through this treatment. So, and again, the next sentence in the book. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. And that was just that deal. Then I said, well, self-knowledge isn't going to work. And I was a guy that knew a lot about alcoholism. I'd been to treatment centers. There's a book called Under the Influence by Dr. Milam. There's a huge treatment center out on the West Coast called Milam Treatment Center, and it's a fantastic book. And I went into a treatment center where that was the main deal, was reading Dr. Milam's Under the Influence. And I learned all about the synapses in the brains, and you get some of this stuff mixed up. It's been years ago and I didn't stay sober, so I'm probably not a good person to be quoting this, but it had all the little deals about the receptors and how after a while they get kind of separated and they don't shoot the spark quite right, and how those things got to mend and all this stuff. And it was that same deal, the self-knowledge. I mean, I was loaded with knowledge about alcoholism. And that was a treatment center, and I had the same deal. I actually got drunk the day I got out of that treatment center. The day I got out, I got drunk. But it wasn't, for the frightful day came, so the self-knowledge didn't work for me. And I had that same experience. Self-knowledge had failed me. Self-will had failed me. And Bill tries one more thing over on page 8. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. Fear sobered me for a bit. And like I could tell you when I was at my mother's house there, which was months before I found that AA meeting and was given the gift of sobriety, I could tell you a story being there where I had hepatitis for one thing, so I was really sick. And so I was kind of yellow colored, and I couldn't eat. I had no energy at all. I was back and forth to the hospitals. And during that time, I'd got a little money at some point, and I went to a bar, and I got in a fight in this bar, and a guy totally beat the crap out of me, and he broke my eye socket bone, my cheekbone, my jaw was broke, and I had to have surgery on my left eye. And so then I was yellow, but then my face was all puffed out, and I was, my eye had surgery, so I had, it was all full of blood, and I'm living, 28 years old, living at my mom's house in that condition, and I still couldn't stop. I still was drinking and drugging in that condition every time I possibly could, and I think about that, and I think about, well, maybe if I could just remember how bad that was, that I won't ever have to go back to it. Maybe if I just remember how bad it was, I won't ever have to go back to that. But I've had that experience that, fear won't work for a real alcoholic. Because a real alcoholic, I have this mind of the alcoholic that's described in a little more and more about alcoholism. And there is a solution. I have this mind of the alcoholic, and the way that mind works is that if that thought was to even cross my mind, it would be vague. It would be almost like it happened to somebody else. Maybe not today, but the time and date would come when that will fail me, remembering how bad it was. It will be, I got to a place where, remember I talked about drinking that bottle of wine real fast? Well, later on in my drinking, many years later, I kind of came back to that. I would buy really cheap wine because it was cheap and affordable. And I had this deal where I could drink a bottle of wine really fast. I'd take big pulls off this bottle of wine. And it would just relax. It would just calmness. And I wouldn't even have to wait till that alcohol hit my brain. I would just be at a place where I would just be, just the warmness going down my throat and the warmness in my belly of that cheap wine, the way that would feel. And I can even remember what it felt like when I exhaled and all that alcohol would be evaporating out. And just that feeling, and I would just be like, and it was like that ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. I had that ease and comfort. And the problem is that, when suffering from the mind of the alcoholic, because I got this horrible situation that I remember at my mother's house. And And then I've got this other thing, this ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. And I know as an alcoholic, without a real answer, without a complete psychic change, the time and day will come when I am only going to remember that ease and comfort. And if I remember this other deal at all, it's just going to be this vague, hazy deal, like maybe somehow it won't hurt me this time. So we're going to go just a few more minutes here. But we do have a mic up here we can turn on. And so is there any questions to answer? We'll kind of talk a little bit more about the first step maybe here. We'll talk a little bit about the second step and kind of set the format for tomorrow. And then we're just going to break off and have some fun for the night. It's 9:30. I think probably most people work today and have had long days. And we won't keep people here. But is there any questions and answers or comments? Okay, we do have a mic here. The reason that we have the mic is for the benefit of the people who might listen to these CDs that he's making. It's really hard to do the question and answer format without that. But don't let that make you nervous. I'm going to continue to ask that question. If you have questions or comments about the material that we've covered, I would really encourage you to ask about it. So once we've established in the first step that we are hopeless aside from a spiritual experience, there's a deal in More About Alcoholism. And I'll get you a page number here in just a second. And actually, I think it's 45. I think it's the first page of We Agnostics, 44. The first paragraph, we go through there is a solution. Then we go to More About Alcoholism. And in More About Alcoholism, they really tell us these stories of these guys. And actually, one of these stories is in There Is a Solution. But they tell us the story of these guys. They tell us the story of Fred. They tell us the story of Jim. They tell us the story of the certain American businessman. They tell us the story of a man of about 30 or so. And there's one more story in there, and it's an analogy about a jaywalker that they try to tell us that isn't all the rest of these stories the same as a guy who just gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. These people all have something in common. They all have something in common, and what they have in common is this. They all had exposure to the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, the early members. They had all made a start, but had failed to enlarge on their spiritual life. They'd all been given this message that Dr. Bob had, that we've got this opinion, this doctor's opinion, and this phenomenon of craving, and that that takes a spiritual experience to recover. And these are guys that made a start or made a beginning or something in AA, and then they ended up drinking again after having self-knowledge, self-will, and fear fail them. They're people that came to AA and did some of the work that's necessary to have a spiritual experience. They all have that same thing in common. The jaywalker finally runs in front of a fire truck and gets his back broken. But the analogy is the same. This analogy is that we do these things sober, that in our sober life we get restless, irritable, and discontent. I just had a phone call the day before I came here from a guy who's 30 years sober and has relapsed. 30 years sober. And he called me. And you know what he told me? He told me he's been in the program saying he was sober, and he hasn't been sober for 7 years. Yeah. Can you imagine what that would be like? And what I told him? I told him, you know what, brother, this could be me, and this phone call could be the other way around. And man, I'm so glad that you called. I might need you to be there for me someday. He got restless, irritable, and discontent sober. He didn't enlarge on his spiritual life, and it took a little longer than it took for these 4 people, but he had the same thing. And the book is perfect. There's a speaker that that says this, and I don't know if it's his deal, but I will attribute it to him, just in that, it's not from me. That and he says about the perfectness of the big book, and I really believe this book is just absolutely perfect for the alcoholic. It just doesn't need to be changed, and it's just a perfect thing. What he says about this is, he says that this is the first time in the history of the planet that we've had this concise, precise way written out on how an alcoholic gets from that place of that hopelessness that Bill was in to this place of a useful and happy, recovered life. It's just right there, written there, and it's just absolutely perfect. And there's another speaker that says that, Bill was 3.5 years sober when he wrote this stuff. He was 4 years sober when the book was published. But, he wrote our 12 steps 3.5 years sober, sat down at his kitchen table and wrote the 12 steps and said he did it in 30 minutes. And the reason that I believe that it was really a divinely inspired deal, and I love the analogy that Bill only held the pen. He was a vehicle. And I feel that same way, that years later they realized that, and that's part and parcel where our 12th tradition comes from. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of these traditions. And what that means is that, when I'm sitting working with a newcomer, if my head is in the right place, I'm completely anonymous in that process. And I think that's the way Bill was. Bill held the pen. And the reason I believe that is, in this speaker says the same thing. He says that I've been 3.5 years sober, and you don't know these things when you're 3.5 years sober. That's how he knows that Bill didn't write this himself. And I like that. He didn't know these things. And, he wrote something that was far beyond his actual experience. And I love this paragraph in We Agnostic. After they give us all this stuff, and they really hammer us on the first step over and over and over again. And Bill has this way of writing, and someday somebody will coin a term for this, and maybe it's already been, but he has this way of writing where he tells you what he's going to tell you. Then he tells you what he's going to tell you. And then he tells you what he just told you. And and that's the reason he put Fred and Jim. And that he even has a tricky part in there. If you'll read this, he says, our first example is a friend we'll call Jim. Well, didn't we just look at the man of 30 or so just right before that? And didn't we just look at Bill's story before that? And in the forward to the second edition, you got some stuff about Doctor. There's a whole bunch of them. But then he comes back, well, our first example is just... And he just hammers us with this stuff. And then in We Agnostics, he ends up coming back to this idea of the first step for the last time in the book. And it's not the last time in the book. Actually, the last time in the book, he wraps it up. He brings us right back to that hopelessness of alcoholism in A Vision for You. In a beautiful way, in the first couple paragraphs of A Vision for You, he brings it back to us. But he leaves it aside for a good part of the rest of the book now. But he brings us all back to these same things again. And that's this first paragraph on page 44. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And this is why I say this is perfect. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. He's not telling you one thing. He's just saying if that's the way it is. He's just sticking to his own experience. And I've really learned that that's what we need to do around here. Just stick to our own experience. I'm here to tell you what my experience is. I got no idea if anybody else in this room is an alcoholic or not, or anybody that I sponsor is or not. My job is to help them find that out by reading this book to them and sharing what my experience was. But he uses those words, if, when you honestly want to. And I did. I said, well, yeah, when I honestly want to, I couldn't quit entirely because I had that same experience of, this time they knew I'm in business. And it says, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, once I take a drink, do I break out in this phenomenon of craving or not? If when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, he says you are probably alcoholic. It's a self-diagnosis deal. Some people say that this alcoholism is the only disease where the patient has to diagnose themselves. there's nobody that can tell you you're alcoholic or not. It's something you got to come to on your own. And it's a good thing to revisit in these retreats is to revisit this idea of, am I an alcoholic? Let me look at my experience. Yeah, well, when I honestly wanted to, could I quit? If when drinking, did I have little control over the amount? It says you're probably alcoholic. Okay, well, probably I'm an alcoholic. Then it says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. You may be suffering from that. Only a spiritual experience will conquer. Well, how do I know? Well, I knew because everything else in my life had failed. And I kind of still come from a school of thought, I think that, and this is coming from a guy, again, that's been wrong about most everything. But I still come from a school of thought where I really think if you got other options available to them, you probably ought to go try them first. Because you're probably not going to, if there's anything else available to you, you're probably, my experience was that I wasn't willing to do what is required for recovery from alcoholism, required to bring about this spiritual experience that needs to, that I says you may be suffering. So it's like these questions. Am I suffering now? Was my friend that I got the phone call from the night before I came here suffering from a condition that only a spiritual experience will conquer? Have I come to this retreat this weekend suffering from a spiritual condition that only a spiritual experience will conquer? We don't know. It says probably, maybe, if, when. Though that's like, that is so perfect, because alcoholics will not be told what to do. You can't do it. You can't force this deal. Somebody told me in early sobriety, and I don't know how long this has been around AA, but one of the great truths in Alcoholics Anonymous is this: they're not ready until they're ready. And if somebody's ready, I can't say the wrong thing. And if somebody's not ready, I can't say the right thing. I've sat and taken people through this book and given them everything, making sure I didn't leave anything out. Every little piece that was given to me all the way along. And they didn't have an experience, and they didn't, they didn't finish the steps. They didn't finish the amends. They didn't ever go out and work with others. They just didn't have the same experience I had. They weren't ready. So you're ready, and only, I think that the only way that we know when we're ready is when this is an attractive thing to us. When it said that only an illness for a spiritual experience will conquer, for me, I wanted that. I could see that these guys that I went through this workshop with were really they were on fire with the program. And there was something about this camaraderie that they had and this happiness that they had, and they were guys that joked a lot and laughed a lot, and there was just something about them. And they said, that what had happened to them is that they'd had this experience of working the steps that had brought this about in their life. And I'd listened to them enough to kind of come to terms that when I first came to AA, you all looked so clean cut and nice, and I just saw it. And that's why, I think I ended up at the kind of hall I did. There was people there that looked more like I did at that hall. But I just thought, man, these people can't possibly have been where I've been. I just couldn't really believe it. But after listening to those guys' story in that workshop, listening to them for a few weeks, I was convinced pretty early on that these were guys that knew all about the drinking game. I was convinced of it. They didn't look like it from the outside, but when I listened to what they had to say, I thought, wow, man, these guys really were where I was. So I think I think that's kind of a good place to end for the night. Tomorrow morning, what we'll do, we're going to come back and we're going to look at the second step. We'll start with another little meditation. We'll do a little prayer. We'll do the second step. We're going to kind of go through We Agnostics for a little bit. We will actually do a third step prayer together for those of you that want to. And I'll do about a 15-minute meditation before we do that tomorrow with instructions and everything. So hopefully you can all make it back tomorrow. I know that not everybody's staying here at the retreat. But before we end, is there any more questions or comments from anybody before we close? Yeah, please. I think you just turn that on and you should be going.
Tom, an alcoholic.
Hey, Tom.
Could you comment on the idea of an acute alcoholic versus a chronic alcoholic, if that means anything to you?
I look at what the big book has to say when it comes to alcoholism, and they do describe. This program was set out for a particular type of alcoholic. Dr. Sockworth does call them the chronic type. He calls them the type with whom all other methods have failed. He calls them the hopeless type. And this is the type of alcoholic that this program is really made for. People who are not, and the reason I guess I'm struggling with that question is I don't concern myself with that too much. With who is in AA and who isn't in AA. I know it's a little bit of a controversial thing. I am fully aware that there's people in AA who are not alcoholics. I'm even more fully aware that there's people in AA that are not the type of alcoholic that I am, this hopeless type. I diagnosed myself, and it was just my experience abundantly confirmed that I was this hopeless type alcoholic. So I am fond of saying this, and I don't know if this is getting to the core of your question, but I am really fond of saying this, and this is that the terms are different for different people that come into AA. And I don't like to carry it much further than that, but the terms are different. And what I mean by that is that there are people that come into Alcoholics Anonymous. It's been my experience. And again, I'm not pointing fingers or saying right or wrong or anything else. It's just my experience. There's people that come into Alcoholics Anonymous and they seem to be able to stay sober and have relatively happy lives. I've actually seen it. I would like to believe it wasn't so. I'd like to just believe anybody that doesn't work the steps is miserable. But there's people that come into Alcoholics Anonymous, they have relatively happy lives, and they maintain long-term sobriety without doing the things that I do. And I've even looked at it even further than I'm the type whom half measures availed me nothing. I'm that type of alcoholic. There's a place in How It Works that says that, there's these type of people who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. And that's me. I'm a guy whose chances are less than average. I do not have the same chance of staying sober as the average guy that comes into AA. And I believe that to my core. So with that, I don't worry about all the rest of that stuff. I know what I need to do to stay sober. I carry that message to people. The message that I carry is only attractive to a certain type of alcoholic. The guys that tend to come to me for sponsorship are hopeless. I don't get too many guys that come to me and are not. The people that tend to be attracted to my message are the last gaspers. The guys that have been in and out of AA, and they just can't seem to stay sober, and they come and do this work. So I don't know if that, but if you've got more to add to that, I'd be welcoming your comments. But I don't know if that. But the terms are not different the terms are not the same for everybody that comes to AA. The one spectrum is the guy that just goes to meetings. He hangs out in the fellowship, and he stays sober and has a relatively good life. Might even have a pretty good story. Might be a guy that gets up and tells a great story, and everybody laughs, and it's a great time. But he's not doing steps. He's not doing what I'm doing to stay sober. That's one end of the spectrum. Guys that just come in and they're easily able to just set aside alcohol, and they like life in AA, and they stay sober. Don't do anything more than that. Not really making an effort at living the spiritual life. There's that extreme. The other end of that spectrum is the guy that comes into AA, and he gets a home group, and he gets a service position, and he gets a sponsor, and he starts in the big book, and he's solid in the circle and triangle. And he does all this, he gets down on his knees, and he does a third step, and he writes the inventory, he does a fifth step, and he has a huge experience in 5, and he comes out of that, and he starts making amends, and he quits making amends for a week, and he's drunk. And I've seen that kind of hopelessness. I've seen it over and over again. And I tend, for some reason, to think that I'm kind of on that side of the deal. And so I don't question really this deal about alcoholics or non-alcoholics or who's in AA or who's not. I know I am not very uniquely qualified to decide who gets to stay and who gets to go here. And so I'm better off as a guy that kind of worries about himself. So I do my deal. You know, I pray, I meditate, I work with others. I told Tom this the other day. A guy that I sponsor is just brand new. He's brand new in sponsoring people. He's a year sober. He's been through the steps. He's just on to sponsor people. And he asked me, he said, well, what do you do when you're not sponsoring somebody, when you're not really working with somebody? Do you kind of go heavy on the other parts of the program? Do you kind of do more service work or something? And I thought about it. I told him, I don't know. I don't know what you do because, I'm clear what the terms are for me. I was a guy that I was told you got to give this away to keep it. And I'm not saying anything from a place of ego. It just is what it is. I'm very grateful for it. But, I've been doing this for 17 years. I've never, during that entire period of time, I've never not been working with a new guy. Never. I've always had somebody coming over. I've always been meeting with people. I've never, once in a while, I think I've got down to one a couple of times and I kind of panicked a little bit. Like, God, if he gets drunk, I'm in big trouble. So I've kind of gone to people, and I really like looking at it that way. It's been, I've come from the other extreme where I was really kind of concerned that there's people in AA that aren't alcoholics and don't have to do this, and there's non-alcoholics in the rooms. And I was really concerned about that at one time. And I think I've become less concerned about trying to diagnose the differences and stuff. I kind of share my experience with people, and it's attractive to a certain type of alcoholic, and it's not attractive to others. I get a lot of people that won't sit in a workshop like this and listen to this kind of stuff. They kind of think it's a little bit too much. That's all right for you, but thank you very much for the information kind of stuff. So, yeah. Anybody else before we close? That was a long answer, wasn't it? Got me thinking about a couple things, though. Okay, well, I'm going to turn my mic off, and thank you guys for the night. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're back running again. Good morning. Once again, my name's Kenny. I'm an alcoholic. And welcome to our 12-step weekend spiritual retreat. And I'm very grateful to be here. And I think we've probably added a few people from last night, and I think it'll kind of build through the day here. So as people come in, we'll just help to just kind of direct them into taking a seat. We're going to start this morning with a couple of minutes of meditation. We'll take care of a couple of quick things. For one, we were looking at Bill's story last night, and I had this mention about goose hung high. And Audrey was kind enough to come up with a description or a definition for us. And it says, to have a goose to hang high in preparation for eating during this Depression era was a sign of having good fortune or wealth. So there you are. You hang the goose high to show that you're going to have plenty of food to eat. That means things are going good. So it's a Depression era saying, which is kind of about, I think, what we imagine. But we will start this morning with a couple of minutes of just silent meditation. And we're going to kind of build on the meditations this weekend. We'll probably try to do 1 or 2 minutes of silent meditation before each session. So is there anybody here that's never done meditation before, ever? So, well, that's good. So you're all kind of meditating people. And that's a good thing. In Alcoholics Anonymous, it's actually a part and parcel of our 12 steps is this idea of prayer and meditation. And we'll do a lot more work around that when we get to the 11th step. But my experience in sponsorship is that as soon as I have an indication, and they actually talk about that in step 12, they talk about at the very first meeting, we're to get an idea of, or even before the first meeting, if we are fortunate enough to have somebody who is close to the alcoholic that we can talk to get an idea of these kinds of things. One of the things they say we get an idea of is a person's religious leanings. And it's very important. And as soon as I have an idea if a person has some kind of of a belief. The steps are in order for a reason. I think that we will not have the power to write inventory until we've done a third step, and you really aren't adequately going to make a decision to turn your will and your life over to this power greater than yourself if you haven't had this experience of coming to believe in something in step 2. So the steps kind of go that way. It's really difficult to do a fifth step until you've really sat and done the pencil on paper work in step 4. So the steps go like that. But one step that I have personal experience of starting to work very early in sobriety is this idea of seeking through prayer and meditation, this conscious contact with God. And so I will take people to 86 and 87 early on in the steps. If people are coming to my house and we're going through the book and I see they're having a really difficult time, I will take people to that place. And we're going to kind of leave the first step behind here this morning. We're going to look at steps 2 and 3 this morning. That idea of starting to introduce people to prayer and meditation early on, I said, was my own experience. There was a guy that was around the hall when I was in really early sobriety, and I was going absolutely nuts. I mean, I was like, my guts were just like just twisted and I couldn't get a deep breath, and I was staying awake all night long. I mean, not sleeping at all, sober, and just, I was just going out of my mind, and I just thought, and I just had all this tension in my face. I just was, I was ready for a drink. And I knew this one guy that every time they called on him in the meetings, he always talked about spirituality, and most people kind of thought he was a little nuts. And I think maybe I did it too at the time, but I have come to realize that there's a lot of stuff going on in the spiritual life that I hadn't accounted for before. And this guy, he would talk about all kinds of stuff, and he had these teachers in India that he had traveled and seen, and now he said he didn't even need to travel to see them because he communicated with these cats telepathically, and he would go into meditation for 10 days at a time, and he said when he went into meditation for a long enough period of time that he could walk through walls, this was the first guy that I ever sought out for spiritual advice in the program. I thought, well, God, if he's walking through walls and stuff, he must be able to help me, calm down for a little bit. And so I went to him and I asked him, and he gave me some really, really simple instructions for meditation. I think everybody here's, we didn't have anybody raise their hands that has not ever done meditation, but you'd be surprised. I do a lot of workshops. I do these workshops in Seattle where we take groups of people through the steps at a time, and like I think I talked about those a little yesterday. They last 6 or 8 months, and we'll get through, all the way through the whole book in that time, meeting once a week. We'll go through all 12 steps as a group. And during those times, it's not unusual that I have a pretty good contingency of people that have never done meditation. So I offer them the same advice that this guy offered me in early sobriety. And I just went up and I said, listen, I'm going out of my mind here, and I'm wondering about maybe this meditation would help calm me down a little bit, and I don't really know how to do meditation. And he gave me some good practical advice. He gave me this idea of just getting quiet and concentrating on your breath. Just try to breathe in and breathe out. And that was really a great meditation for me in early sobriety. And he said, every time my mind starts to wander, don't worry about it. Just recognize it for what it is. Just like if a car was to pass down a street, I could say, okay, well, that's this kind of car, or that's so-and-so, and I recognize it. And then I see it go away, but I don't think about it for any longer than that. And when I recognize that anything is distracting me from my meditation, I just bring it back to the breath. I don't get disturbed about it. We remember that this is a practice. And so as we're doing some meditations this weekend, if you find that you're getting distracted, or you don't feel like you're really solidly doing the meditation, the important thing to remember is that we're just practicing here. And it takes a long, long time to get to a place where you can be quiet for 20 minutes or get quiet for an hour. It takes years of practice for most people just to get to that place. And I was that way in early sobriety. I would go back and I would try to do this thing that he'd showed me, and I would get quiet. And I would, and then next thing I knew, I didn't even realize I'd be up making a bologna sandwich or something, you know. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, I was supposed to be meditating, or I'd be over making a phone call, or I'd be thinking about work, or I mean, it was impossible. It was absolutely impossible for me to get quiet for 30. It was absolutely impossible for me when I was in early sobriety to get quiet for 30 seconds. So I certainly don't expect that more than that out of the people that I sponsor, but I do suggest early on that they try some of these techniques. Another thing that, and this guy's name was Ken as well, another thing that Ken told me was that he said it helps to have a mantra. And as you're concentrating on the breathing, if you kind of lose track of that, just go to your mantra. And he said, "Thy will be done" is a mantra that's used in all religions in one form or another. Not my will, thy will be done. And he said you can shorten that to "thy will be done." And then he said you can even shorten that just to "thy will." And then anytime you're distracted, just bring it back to your mantra. Another thing that he taught me about a focal point, which means that when you close your eyes in your mind's eye, which is what you see when you're closing your eyes and concentrating on your breath, that it's helpful for some people to bring into their mind their guru, their savior, their spiritual teacher. And I didn't really know what any of these cats looked like that Ken was talking about. So there was one particular person that I did know what that person looked like. I thought I'd seen some paintings and stuff in childhood of this guy. And I tried that, and it didn't really come to me much. But what did come to me when I was doing that was just kind of the bright light. I could just kind of focus on a small, bright light, and I could just focus on that getting brighter and brighter as I was doing my meditations. And that was silent meditation. Another good piece of advice that came to me a lot later on is I was taught to sit a certain way in meditation where I was sitting straight up and keeping my spine straight, and that this was very important to bring these centers together. And I had difficulty with that in some respects because I was really out of shape. That's probably the biggest reason. But I just, and a guy gave me some advice years later, and he said, no, really the idea is just to find your seat. That for Westerners that are used to using the backs on their chairs, sometimes these positions aren't very comfortable, and so he just said, find your seat. And that was great advice for me as well. Just find your seat in meditation. Just find a position that's comfortable for you. Find a chair that's comfortable for you. And then use that in your meditation with these things. So with that, we won't go back to that again. We'll do a little silent meditation maybe before each session, 1 or 2 minutes. I'll bring us out of that with a prayer. I brought this chime that I said I would yesterday, and you can see that some props have been added up here. And I really appreciate that. And I will say about all of these, somebody smudged this room this morning. I don't know if anybody can smell the sage, but somebody came and smudged the room this morning. I don't know who was that. Maybe it was, Oh, Janice. Thank you so much for smudging the room. And I burn sage at my house, and it does kind of have a smell that can be. People sometimes smell that burning sage and think that it's marijuana. And one time I was burning sage, and my little daughter came up and she said, that smells like Sonia's house, she said. And I was like, oh, geez, I mean, maybe I don't want you going to Sonia's house anymore. So that's what that smell is. That smell is sage, and it's meant to purify. We've got somebody's been kind enough to bring a candle up here and light a candle for me, and I really, really appreciate that. I do the same thing. We burn a lot of candles in my house. We burn sage, and I have essential oils I burn, and I do a lot of these things. I have pictures on my wall of I've got a picture of Bill Wilson on my wall. I've got a picture of Mother Teresa on my wall. I've got a picture of Gandhi on my wall. I've got a picture of Bill and Ebby together on my wall, and I've got a picture of the man in the bed on my wall in my office where I work with new guys. And none of those things bring about the presence of God, but they remind me of the presence of God, and they remind me about this. The reason I have those particular people is because AA really, truly is, and we'll get there to the 12th step on Sunday, but it really, truly is recovery through self-sacrifice and service to others, and it's not a new idea. But it seems to work very well for alcoholics to get outside of themselves. So I use these props like this, and I like them. The chime is the same thing. I'll get back on our topic here. The chime this was a gift from my wife. This chime is something that's meant to get our attention. You ring the chime. You'll notice if you get quiet that you can hear the chime ringing for a long time into your meditation. They actually have chimes like this, much bigger ones. You know, they'll have all the way up to the big gongs and stuff that you'll see in temples sometimes. And they've got these chimes that will ring for 20 or 30 minutes. So these people know when the sound of the chime is done, that they're done with their morning meditation, for instance. So this will ring. I think you will be able to hear this for a minute or so, but it just kind of gives us it's a good practice. And then I'll ring it again when we're coming out of meditation. And we'll do 2 minutes this morning just to kind of get us started. And I'll bring us out of that with the prayer, and then we'll get started on our step 2 here. So. Heavenly Father, Mother, and Child, Lord of the happy, joyous, and free, we thank you for your presence here with us this weekend. And as we go forward here in this practice of the 12 steps, we'd ask that you would be our guide. We'd ask that you would guide our thoughts and our actions, and especially our words. We'd ask that this retreat this weekend be allowed to fill us with your love, and that love would overflow from us into the lives of many people. Amen. Okay. We are on step 2. We'll give you a little bit of a vision of where we're headed here today. There'll be a little bit of group conscience involved here. We're going to do two sessions. We'll do one session here this morning, and we'll cover step 2. We'll try to get up to step 3 here before we take a break. We'll cover that probably pretty quickly. I do want to clarify once again that, we are not working the steps here. What we are doing is trying to encourage the people that come to this workshop to work the steps, and encourage people that are coming to this retreat to search diligently within themselves and to think honestly. So we'll move rather quickly, and I'd like to clarify that. If I was working one-on-one with somebody, or if I was doing one of these workshops, we would be looking at every single paragraph and everything, doing the entire book, and you just can't do that in these weekend retreats. So we're doing the next best thing, and we ended up last night kind of covering the first step. But now we're at this place in We Agnostics. We left off on page 44 in We Agnostics. And if you have your book, you can follow along. And if you don't, that's okay too. We're not going to try to do too much direct reading and quoting out of the book. We're going to do these 2 sessions this morning up to steps 2 and 3. We'll come back. When we come back for this next session, we'll actually try to do a 3rd step as a group. And I'm not sure how that'll work in this configuration, but we'll figure that out at the break. But we'll do a 3rd step for those who wish to participate. We'll do a little music. We'll do a little longer meditation. We'll get down on our knees. We'll do a 3rd step prayer for those of you that want to have that experience with us this weekend. We'll come out of that experience. We'll talk about 4 and 5 a little bit. And when we come back after lunch, I think we'll come back around 1:30 or something. And we'll announce the times all the way along in case I don't get this quite right. But we'll come back. We'll do a couple sessions. We'll do a session 1:30, 2 or 3 sessions before dinner. 5:30 will end. And that's where the group conscience part comes in. We could have another session after dinner if the group at that time wants it. But a lot of times there's so much information at these retreats. We need time to process everything too. It can become absolutely overwhelming sometimes, the amount of stuff that you get here. So with that, I did kind of hit us with a letter last night from my mother right off, and I thought I'd do something a little funner this morning before we really get into this serious stuff. And this step 2 is such a great thing. That the idea here is that sober, we can take a look at this. And I think we kind of had a show of hands last night, but we have a lot of people here that are either they are currently working the steps, or they have worked the steps and are currently working with others. And that constitutes almost everybody that was here, at least at last night's meeting. So, we could come from this point of looking at this from a newcomer's perspective in this come to believe idea, or we can look at this from an experience for those of us that have been in the program for a while, in this We Agnostics, that I can still go back and find areas of my life that I am agnostically inclined. And they talk about that in here, those of us that are agnostically inclined. And I need to continuously go back and look at that I may say I believe in God. I may say that I have this power greater than myself in my life. But if you hang out with me, you might say, well, Kenny, it looks like you're pretty fully in control of the financial situation here, and it doesn't seem to me like you're operating a lot of faith in that area. Or you might not be operating a lot of faith where it comes to these talks that you have with your daughter, for instance. It's interesting that and this thought just came to me just recently, that where, and Shannon and I have talked about this, where our daughter's concerned. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she's kind of coming out of this phase, thank goodness. But she was dressing in all black, dyeing her hair black. She wanted to get a mohawk. This was, I was just kind of like, oh wow, here it comes. But she's a great kid. And I try to convince her that, that you've got to live life this certain way. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to get good grades. You're going to have to go to college, and, you need college to get the good, job. I've got all this stuff, and I'm doing that out of love. But at the same time, my experience is the only God that I know, and I know no other God, is a God that will let you royally screw up your life, and it's still okay. But I don't want my daughter knowing about that God. So that's agnosticism. That's agnosticism. So in my life, I am afraid to share with her the God that I know, the God that really loves you no matter what you do, that it doesn't matter if you screw up, that things will still work out so long as you do some things, because there is that fear. Of course, we all have seen the other end of that too. So I said I'd start out with something real funny, and today this is kind of related to the 12th step. So I'm bouncing around a little bit, but it just came to me. I wanted to get this in and not forget to look at this. But when I'm sponsoring somebody, we're going through the work, and we talked about this yesterday. This whole deal is really about 12. It doesn't ever, no matter how many times you work the steps, it doesn't ever end up anywhere but reaching your hand out to a still suffering alcoholic. That's the whole deal. All the rest of this is to enable us to be in fit spiritual condition when people come to us. And my life depends on people showing up. So I don't take it personally with people that I sponsor. I try not to. But when I sponsor people, we set some ground rules, and I'm really probably kind of a little conservative on that end of the sobriety spectrum when it comes to sponsoring people. I will tell you that if you don't show up, I'm not going to sponsor you. And if you don't show up a few times to my house, I find somebody else to fill that spot. And it's not a personal thing. And and what I mean by that is I bring people to my home, and I live in a really Niles has been to my house, and I live in a really beautiful home today, and I've got a beautiful wife, and we've got 2 great kids, and I've got this. So I like to bring people to my house and then I let them know that this isn't a personal thing. These rules that I set down, that if you don't show up, my life depends on working with alcoholics. I have to be shoulder to shoulder with people in this work. So I got to get people through the steps that are going to work on this with me, that are going to go out and sponsor other people. And if you're not showing up, it's, and I just tell them that, if I drink, I will lose everything. I'll lose this house, I'll lose my wife, I'll lose my job, I'll lose everything here. So you got to show up. And if you don't, I'm sorry, but I'm going to bring somebody in that will. My life, it depends on having people that are showing up at my house on a regular basis. So in that respect, I had a sponsee. It was a roommate of Niles at one time, actually. And I had a sponsee that couldn't show up. And he was really worried. He's like, oh, my God, I haven't showed up a couple weeks in a row, and Kenny's going to fire me. And he was in the middle of his inventory. And I was kind of considering that, hey, this guy hasn't showed up. He better show up. So he shows up this week, and he has an excuse letter. He said, hey, I know I didn't show up, but he says I brought a letter with me. And so I was like, well, okay, Joe, I got to see this. So Joe gives me this letter, dated August 5th of 2004. It says, Dear Ken, please excuse Joe Kaiser, your second favorite sponsee, from his sponsor-required 4th step progress. Normal progress has been hindered by a combination of circumstances and events beyond his human aid. As you know, Joe has been in recent financial hardships. Unfortunately, his sponsor, who is financially secure, is not familiar with the end of page 96. So if you look at page 96, it says, he may be broke and homeless. If he is, you might try to help him about getting a job or give him a little financial assistance.
Thank you for listening to Sober Sunrise. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a thumbs up, as it will help share the message. Until next time, have a great day.